Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Became a Blood-Drinking Vigilante Fixer? Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Midoriya Izuku learned the world was unfair at 4 years old. He remembered his mother's tight embrace as he sat in his room, rocking him back and forth. She had gripped him tightly, whispering apologizes over and over. That she was sorry. "I'm sorry, Isuku." Almost as though she were saying, "I'm sorry for making you this way." Because heroes didn't look like Isuku. He was a kid way in over his head, ambition too big for his small stature and so far detached from reality. That day, he had learned that mom had given up on his dream of being a hero. He noticed it in the expression his mom gave him when she was calling dad to tell him about his doctor visit, or when she'd watch him draw in his hero journals at the dining table. Izuku couldn't understand it at the time, but as he grew older he learned to place that feeling as pity. Kaken was the only one who hadn't held back, having shoved a young Izuku to the playground floor when he had tried to join in playing heroes after kindergarten. "Didn't you hear what I said? You're a total failure, and there's no way a quirkless Deku like you could the agency of Bakugu." Kaken closed his hand into a fist, a burst of smoke erupting from it. Nobody born as useless as you would ever be able to fight big bad villains like All Might does. The day Izuku was found to be quirkless was the day his relationship with Kaken dissipated from barely a friend to nothing completely. When the bullying started, Izuku had come to terms with the fact that Kaken saw him as nothing more than a weakling. Useless. A true Deku. But even so, he had promised himself he wouldn't waver. Although, in times like these, it was incredibly hard to remember his own words. A 14-year-old Izuku shuddered as he shook out his hero analysis notebook, the distinct smell of pond water and koi, fish food reaching his nose. He gagged at the scent, leaving it to air dry on the ground of the school's open rooftop. The damage did no favors to his already raggedy notebook, which now had the wet ink of 13 bleeding into the cover. He was dressed in his school uniform, the button-up a bit too loose for his skinny frame. Water was clinging his sleeves from where he had plunged his arms in to save his notebook from the school's outdoor pond. "Geez, Kaken." Izuku puffed out a sigh, allowing his yellow backpack to slip to the ground, before sitting down beside it. He leaned his back against the steel fencing of the roof's boundary and closed his eyes. The cool metal felt nice against his scalp, and he took a moment to enjoy the breezy air of the late afternoon. On such a nice day like this one, Izuku would usually enjoy walking home, maybe indulging in a few detours here and there for some hero sightseeing for his analysis notebook. It was the highlight of his day, watching heroes of all different quirks and specialties swooping in to save the day. Of course, he didn't have a quirk per se, but it didn't mean Izuku couldn't draw inspiration from other rising heroes. Maybe he could sketch some ideas for support items that could pull off a move as effective as Kamui Woods' binding lacquered chain prison. "Duddy, why kid? Kid!" Izuku yelped, feeling as though he just jumped out of his skin. The teacher across from him was equally startled, raising his hands up as though to calm him down. Whoa, hey kid. Sorry to scare you." The man in front of him was lanky, tall and wearing a clean navy sweater vest. He didn't look familiar, but from the uniform and leather bag he was carrying, the man blended in perfectly with the backdrop of a junior high school. A teacher then, probably from the younger grades? Hi, hello." Izuku pulled over his damp notebook closer to him, clamping it shut. "Is there a problem?" His green eyes wandered to the man's soft expression, remembering his manners. "Sensei? I couldn't help but notice you sitting up here alone and well." The man was looking down to meet his eyes, a sheepish smile drawing onto his lips. "Even though you're not a student of mine, I can't turn my back on anyone who might need help." He tilted his head to look around. "Seems like lonely company to be here by yourself. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off of—" Izuku banished that train of thought from his mind. Oh, it's not that at all. Actually, He trailed off. How else could he explain why he had come up here? "Oh, my childhood friend of nearly a decade had once again spit in the face of my dreams, And rather than try to keep face to my mom, I've decided to sulk alone here. Just some light reading is all really. A leather messenger bag was dropped to the floor. The lanky teacher, seeing his hesitation, lowered himself to Izuku's level. He sat down at a distance, tentative and careful, almost as though he were trying to coax a small animal. The motions of someone trying to appear as welcoming as possible. You're an upperclassman, yes? What hero schools are you planning to apply to? The teacher says, gesturing towards the discarded hero journal at Izuku's curious glance. Surely someone with an observational journal for heroes would be gunning to be one. The teacher laughed, looking as though he was relishing in the memory. You know, I wanted to be a hero too when I was younger. I even managed to get into Shiketsu before I realized my true calling. With all of the harsh training, studying and rules, enrolling in a hero academy is tough work. Izuku knew that the teacher was trying to distract him, but he took the change of subject gladly. Why, yeah, being a hero has always been my dream since I was a kid. The sentiment was childish, but Izuku smiles a bit at the thought of not being ridiculed for it. The teacher was neutral. He didn't look at Izuku with pity like his mom and classmates did, and he especially didn't look at him with the disdain that Kaken reserved for him. Not in a way that made him feel lower than the worms wriggling in the dirt. A useless Deku. I can't even remember a time when I wasn't watching heroes. Whether it was on the television, or through alerts on my phone. They've always been there. Looking so much bigger than life. Izuku beams. I want to be that kind of person that can save people. I've been studying every day since the year started for UA's practical exam. Just so I can be a great hero that can change the world, like All Might. All Might. The teacher whistles. That's quite a tall goal you've set for yourself. He brought his thumbs to his cheeks, pulling his mouth into a toothy smile. So that's who you want to be like? Mr. Igeo? He chuckled to himself. With your great studying ethic and a flashy quirk, who's to say you can't write? The man's eyes glint in curiosity. I hope I'm not intruding, but what kind of quirk do you have? It might be a bad habit from my past, but I simply love hearing about other people's abilities. Izuku's face fell at the man's words. He wouldn't be able to have the honest conversation he wanted without opening up about his quirklessness. Actually, he fidgeted with his hands. You don't have a quirk, sensei? Sorry if that disappoints you. The teacher didn't speak, so Izuku gave in to his rush of words. That's the way everyone usually reacts when I say that. And tell them about what I want to be. I study like crazy, taking practice exams and looking at flashcards while I eat, and yet it's not enough. Useless. Better off not wasting my time and trying. He clenches his fists against his lap, fingernails digging into his palms. I would give up every part of myself to be a hero and save people. Because as much as I like listening to the radio and reading hero alerts, I could never be happy living on the sidelines. He says, shaking his head, I didn't come up here because I was feeling hopeless or was going to give up. Frustrated. Frustrated that I feel as if I've already been rejected by UA before even applying. Izuku searched the man's dark gaze pleadingly. You've worked with hero students in the past, right? You've seen the drive, dedication from your classmates to help people, right? So tell me, sensei. It was a question he had asked himself over and over. The teacher had kept quiet as Izuku talked, and Izuku was grateful that finally, someone was listening to him with sincerity. A rare moment of confidence bubbled up in him, and he raised his voice to a shout, closing eyes. Can even someone without a quirk like me be a hero? The silence that followed seemed to mute everything else around him. The distant sounds of cars and the murmur of city noise from Muzutafu fell quiet to Izuku, who drew in a harsh breath. This teacher who climbed up the rooftop stairs to help him, who sat with him and listened to Izuku pour his heart out. He so badly wanted someone else to believe in him, to tell him that he could be a hero. Izuku heard a rattled laugh across from him, low and breathy. He dared open his eyes, watching as the teacher stood up and approached him. The expression on his face was unreadable, and Izuku couldn't help but notice the growing unease blossoming in his chest. The environment chilled around him, and suddenly Izuku became aware of how far away he was from the rooftop staircase, back still pressing against the roof's fence. "Sensei?" The teacher's palm fell gently onto the top of his head, lost in Izuku's mess of green curly hair. He pats him reassuringly, although the tension doesn't leave Izuku's shoulders. The teacher's fingers are cold and calloused against his scalp. The hairs on Izuku's neck stand on end, and he dares himself to look up. Something about this situation suddenly felt very, very wrong. The man speaks slowly, as though he were speaking of something far beyond Izuku's comprehension. Tenacity is one of the greatest virtues of a hero. Picking yourself up over and over again. Climbing when your peers, even the society you live in, keeps knocking you down. He brought his other hand out from behind, hand flexing open and reaching to hover over Izuku. The man's fingertips barely grazed against the perimeter of his face. No one believes in you, yet you hold on to the hope that the world will reward you for your efforts. Maybe you are more like All Might than you think, with the blind optimism you parade around. It happens in an instant, fear slithering up his spine and constricting at his heart. The aura the man omitted was a shock that seized at Izuku's nerves and weighed lead at the air in his lungs. An image pulses in his mind, so tangible and real that he swears he can taste it. He's being buried alive. Bodies upon bodies, the pale blank faces of the people he loves and the people who he'll never come to know. Izuku's vision swims, every bone in his body feeling as though it's been pinned down, paralyzed. Illusions of hell. Izuku couldn't see the man's expression from the hand obscuring his vision, but he could hear the mockery in the man's voice. "Out of all the people I've had the pleasure of talking to, you were quite the curious case," he says, hand moving forward to rest on Izuku's forehead. "Goodbye." Izuku flinches backwards, to move out of the way and do something, but the man's hand resting on his head tightens to hold a fistful of his hair. His other hand crackles to life with red energy, and then all Izuku knew was pain. He was going to die. Izuku's body reacted before his mind could catch up with it, desperately trying to pry the hand off his face. It was an inferno to his skin, raging and sending a stabbing pain that pulsed on his cheeks, throughout his entire body. The nightmarish picture in his mind rose up to pull him in, hands dragging him deeper into the agony. The man, the villain, had said something else, but Izuku couldn't hear him over the white static of pain that was darting across his skin, threatening to consume him from the front of his face to the tips of his toes. He couldn't think, mouth opening as if to scream at the searing hot pain tearing at every one of his nerves. Was he screaming? Could anyone hear him? Hot tears began to pool from his green eyes as his fingernails dug into the man's wrist. He was going to die. Black began to swim in his vision, the sea of red in front of him blurring. He didn't want to die. Izuku's mind fizzled out to the pulling grip of unconsciousness, and felt no more. He was being pinned. "You're such a little crybaby, Deku." A small kaken gloated over him, tiny sneaker pressed against the middle of Izuku's chest to hold him down. Izuku squeezed his eyes closed, tears of embarrassment threatening to spill down his freckled cheeks. His knees were covered in scrapes, fresh scratches layering over old scars. The act only made Kaken laugh more, lifting his foot off and folding his arms together. Arms across his chest. "It's no fun having you play villain when you just cry and fall over instead of fighting. Look, Deku is bleeding." Izuku sits up, swiping furiously at his nose with the back of his hand. Blood streaks on knuckles. Agitating it seemed to make it worse as Izuku realizes it's on his lips, in his mouth. The stinging taste, mix of tears, iron, and frustration is harsh on his tongue. He doesn't grimace. He feels a compulsion, like an itch, pulling him to the sensation. So he wipes at it more, small fingers crawling up his cheeks in fascination. He's smearing it. It's all over his face, covering his freckles and sinking deep into his skin. A pang of clarity reaches Izuku through the memory. This isn't right. This isn't right. Izuku feels displaced, staring at his hand, no longer his hand but some sort of mess of color and scent. Kaken makes another retort to his crowd, and in the echoing symphony of laughter hovering above him, Izuku found that he couldn't focus on anything else but the pungent smell of blood. The heavy musk of copper, filling his senses and moist on his lips. Focus, Midoriya Izuku. He's torn away from the childhood memory, the white static of his mind retreating from his eyes. And he wakes up. Doesn't know where he is. Izuku could sometimes be absent-minded, sure. If he's stuck in a particularly deep train of thought, he would find himself zoning out. His brain would run leaps and bounds away from him, leaving his body to run its mouth on its own. But this felt like an entire new level of disassociation. It's nighttime, but hadn't it just been day? He can barely remember. The wall in the corner of his vision is dark, brick texture barely visible in the moonlight. It's like he's in the back seat of his mind, watching a real unfold through misted eyes. Izuku stands alone in an alleyway, staring down at the ungodly amount of red staining his hands. He distantly realizes that the bright tang of metal in his mouth wasn't in his head. Hands trembling, he concentrates on taking deep breaths. In and out. Anxiety was a whole other beast, one he had inherited from his mother, but he couldn't let himself slip away. Not until he knew what was going on. Nervousness bubbles in the pit of his stomach, and Izuku feels displaced from his own body. A stranger in his own skin. He lowers his hands and takes in the sight before him. A woman lying in a pool of her own blood. Izuku's legs give way underneath him. His back's away from the unmoving body, red shoes skidding against the concrete ground before his back knocks into the brick wall behind him. No way. No way, no way, no way. The woman across from him, her dark brown hair askew in front of her face, is mangled on the ground. Like a puppet with its strings cut, she's rested on her side, legs tangled from her pencil skirt and arms splayed out before her. Before him. Hey! Izuku says as he lunges forward, hands hovering about the woman in uncertainty. His voice constricts, although he's not sure if it's the heaviness at his tongue or the squeezing anxiety at his airway. She looked like she had been mauled. A villain. Izuku tenses at the thought, refusing to tear his eyes away from the eerily still woman. Surely, it was a villain that had done this. A villain had. His eyes traced the length of his hand. Scratches were peppered at his wrist, as though someone were trying to get him off. As if a woman was grasping him within an inch of her life, begging him to let her go. Izuku fought off the wave of nausea overcoming his body, hands reaching up to grab at his hair. He jitas, pulling his legs up and burying his head into his knees. He felt his heart thumping in his ears, an invisible hand seizing and twisting at his gut. The raw instinct of panic pounding against his chest yelled to run, hide. He twitches as if to move, but immediately pauses at the sound of a voice. A young woman, no older than Quirk, empath. She can project her emotions onto anyone she makes contact with. The murmur in the back of his head rises to an overpowering voice, insistent and buzzing in his mind. The voice reminds him of the shrill voice of an antique radio, scratchy and detached from the sounds of Izuku's short, semi-hysterical breathing. He looks back at the woman, pale and lips parted. Her quirk can be activated by the lightest of skin contact, but has the drawback of causing massive fatigue for its user, who may not be able to use it for a while. Blood was stuck to the roof of his tongue, in the back of his throat where he had eaten it. But in moments of adrenaline and fear, then surely, when had blood tasted so good? She can activate it as a last resort. Izuku's breath hitched, and he tore his hands out of his hair to wipe desperately at his mouth. Just to get it off of him, away from him. The panic he had felt, now knowing that the emotion is not his, subsides and retreats into his skin. Quirks were more than extensions of people. They were dynamic abilities, completely integrated into the individual even from birth. When a quirk develops, every young child gets a chance to learn how to harness it, to suppress their innate desires and control it. But this felt like the extremity of that, a gnawing desire that was move upon him in its maturity. Amplified and deafening. Izuku felt as though he were possessed. For the first time that evening, the static of his mind briefly retreats, and Izuku is able to place the feeling his new quirk brought to him, trying to bury it in his chest. Pleasure, hunger, satiating happiness singing from his senses. Kamino, Yokohama was a bustling, loud city. The tall urban buildings hugged tightly against each other along the wide streets, filled to the brim with restaurants, bars, cheap dollar stores, and tourist traps. Beyond the urban hotspot, the streets of Kamino stretched out into more quiet areas. The locals knew of the abandoned warehouses. The constant building and abandonment of them were testament to the constant state of change the city was always in, but chose to ignore them on the basis that no good things came from wandering into the area. Tamura paces aimlessly in front of the small television screen in a foreclosed Kamino bar, long forgotten by the bustling of the city. He has only one ringing thought in his mind. Sensei is late. Please have patience, Shigaraki Tamura, Kurogiri says as if hearing his thoughts. He stands behind the bar at the opposite side of the room. Tamura can't see his body through the thick dark fog, but he can tell that Kurogiri's movements are controlled and relaxed. It sees him off a little. Tamura's own hand fumbles to his neck, and he scratches incessantly at the skin peeking out from underneath the two hands holding him. Sensei has been late 8 times this month. All things take time. Everything Sensei does is for your sake, Kurogiri continues. When it's time, Sensei will surely begin entrusting to you what he has in mind for the bigger picture. He gestures to the bar stools in front of him. Take a seat. Tamura's hands momentarily flex into fists, angry, but he begrudgingly sits down. And waits. The small television doesn't flicker to life until 20 minutes after their conversation, and by this point the scratches at his neck had long since grown red with irritation. He had repeated the mantra all things take time like a broken record player in his head. Yet he couldn't stop himself from rushing to his feet because Sensei was finally here. The disfigured face of All for One appeared in an instant. Sensei. Tamura gasps, trying to rein himself in, control himself. Kurogiri had spoken about patience, and Tamura was demed if he wasn't going to show Sensei that he was the epitome of responsibility and capability. He was worthy of being in the know about Sensei's plans, what had been so important to make him abandon his life, sustaining equipment and leave Tamura in the dark? Tamura, All for One greets him, ever calm. No need to be so overstrung. Of course Sensei can see right through him. Still, he can't bite back the question itching at him. Why are you late again? Ever since we arrived to Kamino, Kurogiri and I have done nothing but recruit extras. It wasn't necessarily a waste of time. All for One had trusted him with the task, and although Kurogiri could have easily done it himself, he insisted on bringing Tamura along so he could grow to be more diplomatic. I'm tired of kissing up to a bunch of lost, useless people. Kurogiri steps forward. Shigaraki. Shut up. Tamura whips his head around and snarls. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Sensei. There's no reason why we should be rounding up so many weak and uncooperative people. The artificial white noise of a ventilator fills the silence. Sensei had been building up to something, and as All for One's successor he surely had every right to know. Tamura, have you watched the news recently? All for One says. The news? He could care less about TV. This society of heroes is so content with the way it is now. People are at ease, not just because of the overbearing presence of heroes, no, but rather the way the media portrays them. With the symbol of peace, the crime rate has never been lower than it has been before. All for One muses. Society likes the comfort of consistency. There are the heroes, who are held in the highest regard, who star in interviews and wave at their fans for publicity. And then there are the villains, the scorned scapegoat, who the public erupts in applause to when they are finally maimed and locked away. The ones who slip through the cracks and disappear out of mind. Tamura hangs onto every word. Heroes parade around, hiding the grisly details of their personal lives, standing tall on their pedestals. But what happens when the public turns on itself? When anyone can spontaneously go missing and die? All for One rests his head in his hand and gives a breathy laugh. People are such fragile things. The human body and sane mind can barely take on the strain of 2 quirks. They stop thinking properly and drop like flies, or go on deranged rampages. But if a supreme being could possess that power, then surely he can bring about great change. He pauses, letting Tamura digest what he had said. A society with heroes who can't protect those they're sworn to is malleable to change, your change, Tamura. So that was it. It's like a video game. Recruiting people, gathering party members. Disrupting the peace was just another step in setting up for the final boss. All for one doesn't hide the smile in his voice. All I do is for you, Tamura. Remember that. It takes Izuku all but one all-nighter to gather his bearings. He had no idea where in Mizudafu he was. It was as though he were plucked from the school, left without his belongings, and dropped in the middle of nowhere. The city streets all looked the same. He had run, of course, because the more he had tried to rationalize a proper way to tell the police what happened, the less sense things seemed to make. The scratches that chased up his arms, the mortal injuries on the woman, there was broken glass on the floor, so surely he must have. Should he really turn to anyone for help? How would he even begin to explain this? Izuku felt as though he were losing his mind, his thoughts slipping through the crevices between his fingers. Izuku thought back to his mom, who would listen to news about villains with hunched shoulders and the tip of her nail to her mouth. Would she see him there, amongst a laundry list of villains? The thought of involving her in the situation sent him into a deeper spiral. He just had to think. Think of a way to figure out just what had happened. Izuku walked listlessly forward, red shoes dragging behind him. He had long since abandoned his black school jacket, anything to get the stench of blood off of him, opting for the white dress shirt underneath. He had rolled the sleeves a few times over to his elbows, just in case anyone could spot the tiny red stains peeking from its ends. God, he was so tired. Izuku stares at his hands, long dunked in a thinning reservoir to wash off the blood. His jaw tightens, and the green-haired boy fights back tears weighing on his weary face. Guilt crawls up his throat and he gulps, exhaling heavily through his nose. Because even now, he could feel the dregs of exhilaration, an animalistic instinct that told him this was good. Like a dog that doesn't know when to stop eating, he had hovered over the woman's body for a long time. Rigid and pale, catching the scent of iron from the air with fervent desperation. Izuku had torn himself away with the remaining semblance of thought he had, but he couldn't ignore the pained longing his body had felt when he had finally run. He thinks he's going to throw up again. Wouldn't be the first time today. And law enforcement is now asking the public to call in for any tips as to what is now being identified as a series of grisly serial murders. The news voiceover is almost lost in the passing of cars and people walking, but Izuku hears it. His green eyes find the television on the other side of the street as he pauses mid-stride. Police have identified the body found in downtown Mizudafu as 34-year-old Mizuki Kobayashi, an up-and-coming politician well known for her advocacy for stronger regulations on the pro-hero profession. She was best known by her empathy quirk, fueling her rhetoric of emotion. The image cuts to the image of a soft-faced girl, round face framed by straight dark brown hair. It looks like a portrait taken in the serious environment you'd expect from a politician. Yet Mizuki Kobayashi's face is bright, with light in her eyes and a toothy grin. Izuku can't bridge together the woman in the alleyway to the face on the screen. No known suspects are currently under investigation, but the lack of consistency in cause of death suggests the murders were committed by a volatile group with a variety of dangerous quirks, which may tie to wrong. Izuku turns on his heel, walking back into seclusion briskly. Not because of the attention he was beginning to draw, zoned out in the middle of the street, or even because he couldn't brush off the smiling image of Kobayashi from his mind. It's because the news called him useless Midoriya Izuku, an unknown suspect with a quirk. His head had run through every single plausible explanation for what he could only describe as possession last night. A brainwashing quirk. Mind control. A quirk that gave hallucinations. But for him to have been given a quirk? People can't just pick something they're born with. Izuku knows this most, spending every waking minute of his childhood trying to manifest one. It's beyond simply slapping on an accessory. It would be an augmentation of the very fundamental genetics that define a person. Reconstruction at the smallest level. He feels a phantom pain pulse through his head. Izuku's eyes wander to the marks on his wrist. His mind rides the wave of possibilities of this new revelation. He knew that woman's quirk without ever sharing a single word with her. Before he heard about how she had been slain on that broadcast, there was only one way to test if he had been given a quirk. Izuku gently presses his fingernails into the marks on his wrist and squeezes. He hisses at the stinging pain, curling his hand into a fist. He doesn't let up until he sees small specks of red coming from his reopened wounds. Both reluctant and satisfied with his work, Izuku tentatively brings his aching wrist up to his lips. Izuku is shocked at the small burst of energy coursing through his body, like a high. It feels electric, ebbing away at the exhaustion of yesterday weighing down on his bones. He almost stumbles at the sudden relief that washes over him. He brings his uninjured arm behind to steady him down to the ground, allowing him to crouch beside a garbage bin. Like the gears of a worn-out train, he begins to hear the sound of a tinny voice, his voice at work. The anticipation was killing him before he was hit with an absolute avalanche of sound. The voices were overlapping one another, as though he were stuck in a crowd with different people yelling at him from all directions, pulling at him from all sides. It wasn't the same as when he was looking at one quirk. A 24-year-old. A 36-year-old. An 18-year-old. A scrawny, 14-year-old boy. Quirk. Quirkless. Quirk. Quirk. Her quirk is adrenaline rush. Her flight instinct is greatly enhanced when she feels in danger, bestowing her with great reflexes and it allows him to identify the type of quirk of any warm-blooded person within 30-foot vicinity, although the descriptions are greatly enhanced when he consumes any blood, then he is able to gain a great amount of energy, although brief. Izuku pulls his wrist away slowly. He tries to hold fast to his beating heart, now feeling as though he had just run a whole mile. The high of energy disappears as quickly as it came, and Izuku is left to the mull in his own thoughts. What the hell? Naomasa Tsukachi was in a bind. The detective pinched at his lips with his hand, surveying the 3 case files before him. They were pristine, each of the files looking identical in quality to the fact that they had all been made within so little time. Tsukachi let his eyes stray to the last file, a picture of each victim attached by paperclip. Mizuki Kobayashi would be the latest. Formerly, the 3 had been all marked off as isolated incidents. Extreme frostbite, toxic gas, and now a mauling. 3 drastically different murder methods, all within range of Tokyo. They couldn't have known there was a trend, not until the lastest murder reared its ugly head last night. In the same city as UA High School, no less. Tsukachi looked up at the jingle of the doorknob before Toshinori Yagi made his entrance. Naomasa. He greeted warmly, trying to calm down his harsh breathing. He had been interrupted by a whopping 2 robberies on his way to the police station, and his time limit as All Might was almost at its end. Toshinori had his hand pressed against the doorframe, leaning a bit too heavily on it than was reassuring. He was wearing a baggy white shirt that hid his bony frame, although that did nothing to quell Tsukachi's growing concern. It's nice to see you, Toshinori, although I wish the circumstances were better. He reaches for his cup of tea, one of 2 having been prepared quite a while ago, and gestures to the couch across from him. Toshinori cups the warmth in his hands, allowing himself to sink into the seat with a sigh. Today had been busy, even busier than what was considered normal for such a high-profile pro-hero like him. There were only a few small villains here and there, but Toshinori had found it harder to hold onto his muscular form today in particular. At this point he would be pushing only 3 hours as All Might. He was really losing it, huh? You know I wouldn't have called to speak with you at the station unless it was something urgent. Tsukachi says. This information is confidential, but I want you to know that I felt it was necessary to speak with you as both the symbol of peace and a friend. Toshinori sits upright. This is about yesterday's murder, yes? The secretary in front of the station briefly filled me in on it. A mauling. Those were the words the front desk officer told him, and Toshinori couldn't help faltering at that. With his deteriorating body and shrinking time limit, he felt like he was losing control of the peace he had fought so hard to attain. Pathetic. Tsukachi nods solemnly. It was formerly marked as an isolated incident. A woman fatigued by her quirk prayed on her way home. He flips open the manila envelope, and Toshinori's face twists into a grimace. The attack was merciless. Someone clearly had a lot of resentment and hate. For Kobayashi, we haven't ruled out that this could be a premeditated attack. 3 victims. 1. A freelance writer with an avid hero, fanboy presence on social media. 2. The son of a government lobbyist. And now, a politician who was very vocal on her platform for regulations and reparations to communities damaged by pro-heroes. Tsukachi reaches to pull over another stack of paperwork. They're neatly filed but are large enough to fill Toshinori with unease. These are the missing persons files I've managed to gather since the beginning of these incidents. Ranging from quirkless to not. Of all age demographics. Some of the victims have even been found dead or borderline inconsolable. Tsukachi remembers questioning those victims. Eyes bulging, limp and unresponsive to the sound of his voice. They had a distant glaze in their pupils that unnerved him to the core. Almost more fixture-like than human. Tsukachi's gaze is rigid. The public is angry at the stagnation of progress by law enforcement, some daring to even call the oversaturation of heroes useless. And now a group is killing indiscriminately on both sides of the pro-hero debate, and with the recent murder of such a high-profile politician, the problem can't be ignored. The arguments have become more hostile, accusatory, and charged. Like a spark igniting a flame. The missing citizens could be evidence of attempted recruitment or even another means of bringing more attention to the media outlets. So this is a warning then. Toshinori says. As the symbol of peace, I'm sure to be the voice that Mizudafu and even Japan will look to in this time of need. You won't have to shoulder that burden yourself. Tsukachi knows the warning falls on the deaf ears of his friend's selflessness, but says it regardless. But at this rate, it'll be a responsibility that will surely be moved upon you. I hope you can prepare yourself for when that time comes. The tea in Toshinori's hands has long gone cold. He holds back a cough of blood as he rises to his feet. In an instant, Toshinori appears in his stronger form, towering over the seated Tsukachi. All might, Toshinori Yagi, stands powerful. He flashes his brightest smile and pounds his fist to his chest. Thank you, my dear friend. I won't let your warning be in vain. Izuku hadn't even realized he had fallen asleep until he was startled awake by the sound of falling garbage bins. His heart does a bit of a leap with every tumble of plastic against the concrete floor, and he shrinks even further into where he is crouched. Izuku rapidly blinks away the sleep from his eyes, suddenly high alert. It's the first moment of rest since that incident, although sleep hasn't ebbed away the hunger gnawing at his stomach. It's night, making the tiny corner Isuku is in a pure pitch black. There's a slit of golden light deeper into the alleyway, illuminating an iron door he failed to notice before. The crashing is coming from deeper in as well, echoing off the walls of the narrow passage one by one. In the enclosed space, Izuku can't see anything. Where are you? The voice teases light-heartedly, as though this were a game. Another large bin is tossed to the side, slammed against the wall. You ran right to where we needed to be, so making things difficult now would be a big no. Izuku dares to pull his arms closer to himself. Who was there? Had somebody found him? Was he finally going to be taken in? And in the darkness, it's as though his quirk begins to speak to him. 2 people. An emitter quirk and a mutation quirk. After all of this trouble, another bin. Do you really think? He strains to see anything. I just let you run along now? The man's playful voice is so close now. Izuku brings his hands up to his face and holds his breath. Found out you. The man's voice is above him, but the yell that rings through the passage isn't Izuku's. The new boy's voice, snarling accompanying the sound of struggling, is quickly muffled. They're heading back deeper into the alleyway. Izuku hears the scratches of sneakers against pavement getting farther away now. Izuku crawls out from behind the garbage can and dares to look out. The young man, 21? 23? Has his eyes twisted closed, being dragged backwards. His body conceals his captor, who's too busy trying to find a way to open the door without relinquishing his hold on the boy's mouth. Izuku's not a hero. He hasn't even been to high school yet. The young man kicks backwards. His back is enveloped in light as the door opens. With what he had done last night, he will never be called a hero. The red eyes that open to meet Izuku's, desperate and pleading, widen. The iron door slams closed. And Izuku's body moves before he has a chance to think. He was on the move. Midoriya Izuku never moved forward without a plan. Plans that were straightforward, maybe a bit malleable, but got you to where you wanted. He picked up this habit from his mom, who was ever so fretful at the tiniest deviation from expectation. Izuku was the child of someone he had once seen overthink her route to the grocery store. So, Izuku never acted on anything his brain hadn't thought of a plan A, B, or C for. He kept his head low, wrote diligently in his hero analysis notebooks, and was always thinking. Or filling the quiet with his annoying brain vomit mumbling, as Kaken had once put it. All of that flew out the window as Izuku stumbled to his feet, steadying himself with an arm to the floor before breaking out into a dead sprint towards the sliver of light. His fatigued legs protest at the harsh movement, but Izuku doesn't care. Kidnapping. He had just witnessed a kidnapping, right? With every leap forward his mind drew blanks on what he could do. Izuku's hands fumbled for the doorknob in the dark. Every instinct in him was screaming to run in the opposite direction. He hadn't been noticed. He could easily walk away. And surely he should. Because nothing good came out of seeking trouble, he should be grateful that it hadn't been him. Izuku's fingers catch the doorknob despite this, and he throws the door open. The sudden light strains at his eyes, but he doesn't dare to falter now. It's as though he's now tumbling deeper and deeper into the situation. There was no stopping now. The iron door slams behind him with a bang of finality. The hallway he steps into is illuminated with oil lanterns, bordering the top of the passageway. It's expensive and ornate, red carpet beneath his dirty sneakers and a twinkling chandelier above his head. If Izuku didn't know any better, he'd think he just walked into a restaurant, not the scene of an abduction. Ah! The incredulous laugh snaps him back to reality. The large man twisted from where he was standing. He's looming over the young man, who Izuku now sees has crystals jutting from his skin. Shards lay across the entryway, proof of being forcefully manhandled across the ground. The minerally smell reaches the roof of his mouth as Izuku's breath hitches. You really followed me in here? Izuku gulps. He was completely overpowered, outmatched. He tenses in what could be called a defensive position, knuckles clenched white in poor form. Please, just let him go. The abductor rolls his shoulders and shoots him a cheeky smile. The golden lights of the path cast shadows against the man's large face. Don't get me wrong, I knew you there, little boy. Figured even a homeless rat like you would have some sort of brain for self-preservation. You'd barely be worth anything at the your market, a useless waste of my time and energy. Although now. He cracks his knuckles, and Izuku doesn't miss the orange discoloration of his finger pads. Now, if you're handing yourself to me on a silver platter, who am I to say no to that grace? The color from Izuku's face drops like a stone as the abductor pelts down the hallway, each stomp of the room shaking his legs, rattling his ears. The large man pulled his arm back before reaching forwards, hand outstretched like a claw. Emitter. The words burn in his mind as a reminder, and Izuku pivots his body as thick fingers brush against his clothes, not quite able to grab him. He's off balance, throwing himself to the side. Izuku catches himself on carpeted floor, grabbing his fists around two crystal shards before turning back to face his opponent. He cannot let this man touch his skin. In one swift motion, Izuku presses the shard to the back of his wrist and yanks to make a slit. He presses the bleeding wound to his mouth, relishing in the focus washing over him at the taste of blood. What would a hero do? There's no use dancing around me, rat. Thoroughly entertained, the absolute unit of a man breaks out into a wild laugh. Like a snake, he twists to face him once more, lurching forward. The next moment's process in Izuku's mind like the shuttering of a camera, each grab for his face cutting through air, making the lantern's flames flicker around them. Izuku's a cornered deer, backing deeper and deeper into the building with every dodge. Every opening he sees, if only he could get a punch under his chin, a swipe at his legs, is quickly covered by rapid, venomous clenches at his skin. The back of Izuku's foot hits the crystal mutant eerily still on the ground. Nowhere to run. The abductor cackles, hand reaching for his face. A memory rips into him. Goodbye. The act strikes a nerve deep in Izuku and he's reeling, completely thrown off. He throws up his right arm to block the incoming palm, and the man clenches hard at his exposed forearm. His fingertips flicker orange. Izuku vaguely registers that his right arm has instantly gotten numb, before he's overpowered by the man's massive weight on top of him. They both drop to the floor. With no feeling on his hand, his fingers unfurl, the shard in Izuku's grasp slipping. The man beams at him, cupping his cheeks in between his massive thumb and finger. Izuku shrinks against the man's predatory gaze as he examines him, forcing eye contact. It's his quirk, emitting from his orange tips, that's draining the feeling from Izuku's pinned arm, the chill crawling to his shoulder. He's an ensnared rabbit, wheezing and fumbling beneath the maws of a predator. Well, do you have some valuable information to share, little boy? He breathes on Izuku's face. If you have nothing interesting to say, I might have to pick out those bright green eyes of yours and see if the folks at Yoru will pay for that instead. Izuku screws his eyes shut. The tiny, yet sharp, shard concealed in his other hand weighs heavily on him. Hesitation. He can't just stab someone. He tries to think about All Might, shining and gallant. The hero who saved people and would only fight if to apprehend villains. To deliver justice. All Might wouldn't be on the ground, lashing out like a wounded animal. He tries to think of All Might, the man who would surely be smiling and winning. Izuku finds he can only focus on the rapid breathing of the young man to his side, the weapon in his hand, and his own desperation to survive. Live, Midoriya Izuku. He is no hero. Mustering all of his strength into his left arm, Izuku's eyes snap open, determination raging in his clenched jaw as he stabs at the man's neck. He's weakened, not nearly quick enough to get a good strike, but the sudden surge catches his attacker off guard. The villain only manages to glimpse the crystal before it lounges itself into his shoulder. Izuku immediately knows he broke skin by the scent of blood that overwhelms him. The man lets out a slew of curses, catching his other arm with a spark of orange. Feeling is extinguished from his left arm, falling limply beside him. Izuku struggles to free himself, but the man snarls, catching his face and activating his quirk. The same unnatural fatigue coils around Izuku's head, face dropping blank. His eyes are still open at half-mast, all panic and emotion slipped from his face. He could do nothing but take rapid breaths between parted lips. Both caught arms are violently pinned back onto the ground, Izuku's head knocking against it. It's like his brain had been dunked underwater, crashing under the waves to a chilling quiet. His senses fizzling out a dull whine. He can barely hear anything. He does manage to catch what the man whispers to him, face engulfing his blank line of sight. What scares Izuku the most is the way the man's voice has completely dropped from playful to a quiet scowl. No. I'm really going to kill you. The threat never comes. Electric blue flames fill Izuku's vision, and he can't even close his eyes against the heat that is singeing at his curly green strands. The fire is so close to his face that even under the effects of paralysis, Izuku swears he can still feel it. He's locked in his own motionless limbs, left discarded on the ground like a doll when his captor jumps backwards and out of sight with a frustrated snarl. A hero? He blearily wonders, slack face trained on the ceiling. A new man walks into view beside him, and the first thing Izuku notices are the crude silver staples raised from the man's skin. Purple skin, wrinkled and stretched, pulled along to his hands like a sleeve. Said man raises his arm, and Izuku's eyes tear up at the scorching blue flames that billow above him. The quirk is that of raw power. The range of Purple Skin's fire extends down the hallway in a controlled blast. The man looks like he's smiling before he readies himself for another attack. Each step the man takes forward is emphasized by another eruption of blue fire. Izuku's not sure how long he spends staring up at the ceiling, but Purple Skin eventually returns. He's leaning over Izuku, blue eyes pensive, as if wondering what to do with him. Izuku can't even twitch as he places still warm fingers over his eyes and closes them. Izuku is submerged in complete darkness. Maybe he's still in danger. Izuku is abruptly lifted off the ground, his body flopping like a sack of potatoes over the man's shoulder. He feels purple skin dip down, as if to grab the other limp body, before walking deeper into the building. Izuku desperately tries to struggle, to will the stasis out of his body, but his traitorous limbs give no response. He barely manages to twitch his fingers before he's dropped upright onto what seems like a bench. And then, nothing. No pain, no sudden torture devices poking at his eyeballs. Just the darkness of his paralyzed eyelids and silence. The anticipation is killing Izuku. He counts every second of the grueling 7.5 minutes it takes for him to feel his face again, and tentatively dares to open his eyes. Izuku feels like he's been transported to an entirely different world. He's sitting at what appears to be an eating booth, just as ornate and pretty as the entry hallway was. Beyond the small corner, concrete surrounds the room, far off and covered in overgrown vines. Stalls run alongside the walls of the windowless rooms, adorned with the warm light of lanterns. The ambient noise of voices, of carried conversation and murmuring sweep down the aisles. In the very, very far distance, Izuku can see a staircase. His escape route. "It's about time you joined us." Purple Skin mutters to him from the table in front of Izuku. He's sitting across on the opposite bench, head propped up by his elbow on the table. Like he hadn't just abducted him. Izuku tries to say something insightful, but only manages a groan. "See, he's awake enough. You said you wouldn't talk unless the brat was up, right?" Purple Skin is talking pointedly to his left, and Izuku cranes his neck to look. The crystal mutant is sitting beside him. It looks like the paralysis wore off for him first, as he's leaning comfortably on the table. Ignoring the purple skin man, he turns and addresses Izuku instead. "Are you okay?" At Izuku's hesitant nod, he scowls and lashes out with an arm, hitting Izuku upside the head. He yelps in his seat. "That you're really, really stupid. Seriously, kid." He looks angry, but Izuku can see there's concern in the gesture. "You could have just turned away, ran away and called for help, anything but jump in." Izuku lowers his head at that, but holds his ground. "I couldn't just stand by and watch you get taken? You look like you're 10, for Pete's sake. I'm 14. That isn't helping your case." Purple Skin rolls his eyes from across the table, clearing his throat. Izuku had completely forgotten he was there, watching. "If you two can stop your squabbling for one demon second," he sighs. "You'll be happy to know that the situation's been dealt with." Izuku doesn't question whatever that implies. A noisy abduction and a fight at our front door is just about the easiest way to have law enforcement on our buttes. Although, if that stasis quirk blockhead went through the trouble of dragging you here, you must have some interesting things to say. "Wait, Izuku says, waving his hands out in front of him. So this wasn't some sort of human trafficking scheme." Purple Skin barks out a genuine laugh at that, and Izuku is extremely taken aback. It's the first time he's shown any sort of emotion besides boredom. "You've watched too many movies, brat. Just because we're a black market doesn't mean that we're swiping random innocent people off the streets. We're beneath the law, not beyond our own morals." He bats a hand flippantly at their surroundings, the great stretch of stalls and lanterns, the crowd pointedly looking away from where they Saturday. "Welcome to your market. Around here I'm called Dabi." Purple Skin, Dabi, introduces himself. The air of arrogance that Dabi holds himself with is foreign to Izuku, who spent the majority of his middle school life avoiding big crowds and making a game of turning invisible. "Why are you telling us all of this?" Izuku asks carefully, meeting Dabi's fiery blue eyes. "If this place is as hidden as you say, disclosing your information, your name even, is just giving us more and more hints." Dabi flashes a sly smile, not doing so much as to act surprised from his lounging position. "I get a nice cut of commission for recruiting too. There's been less and less people here recently, see?" Although, his eyes darken, and Izuku can't suppress the shiver that runs down his spine. The maze of tunnels to get out of here are impossible to figure out without a guide. And I'm sure the locals here would like to know who squealed on them, now that I've gotten a good look at you. Izuku wonders if this is what an ensnared mouse being toyed with feels like. Dabi smirks at him. So let's all play nice. But we're getting off topic. If I went through all of the trouble of driving that other guy away, I should get some nice information in return. The crystal mutant's brow twitches. You brought me here just to talk? Do I need to explain your circumstances? Just understand the DMN situation you're in. Dabi replies simply. That makes the young man shift in attention. Just to make it clear, I didn't get dragged here to kick off a grandeur career in criminal activity. I'll only talk on the condition that you'll let me leave. The information I have is not to be taken lightly, yeah? So if I have to talk, all I ask is that you don't harm my patient. Of course, I'm a man of my word. Dabi says. The crystal mutant really stares at Dabi. Izuku was convinced that he'd simply stop talking right there, and they'd never find a way out of this before the silence is broken. I have a patient I work with at Fujiya Hospital. I'm a nurse in the psychiatric ward, and have been working with this patient for a long time. He's clenching his fists on the table. She's a kind woman, quiet and to herself. She doesn't speak much and spends most of her day staring out of her reinforced window, because she had a past of abuse. A mental break caused by years of domestic abuse. But it's not her that's the issue, but the man I found out she was married to. Todoroki Enji. The number 2 hero. FING Endeavor. That's insane, right? He runs his hand through his spiked hair in hysterical anger. The man who stands so close to the top, who's paid and cheered for and worshipped by the media, is the abusive piece of shit behind why my patient would sometimes wake up inconsolable, screaming and scratching at her face. He's in anguish. I can't sit still with this weighing on me. Endeavor pays the hospital to keep this confidential. I've been told personally to keep this quiet, so my own hands are tied from losing my job, but even so. Izuku stares down at his lap, shrinking against the man's voice as it reaches a crescendo. This is what the pro-hero system protects? Can an abuser get a pass for all of the crimes he's committed only because he's so FING powerful? His final words are spat out, and Izuku is stunned at how angry, how bitter it rings out. Is that what they'd call a FING hero? The young man is left heaving, his huffs of air the only thing to fill the silence that hangs over the table. Dabi breaks the silence first, abruptly standing from the booth to stuff his hands into his pockets. He walks from table, taking a few steps towards the exit before standing to face them both. That's just the way the world works. No use crying over it. The system is broken. Although, the fact that Endeavor is a piece of shit is something I already knew. He's not the only hero. Dabi runs a hand against his purple skin, not facing the duo. Well, you kept your end of the bargain, so I'll keep mine. I'll lead you both out. Izuku doesn't need to be asked again, jogging to catch up to Dabi's leisurely pace. Todoroki Enji, the flame hero, Endeavor, is an abuser. The thought runs around Izuku's mind, digging at his fantastic fanboy ideals and throwing them away. Sure, Izuku didn't look up to Endeavor nearly as much as he did All Might, but he had still admired him. Izuku had pages and pages brainstorming on Endeavor, his flame granting him both devastating speed and power. When Izuku had once dreamed of having a fire-breathing quirk like his father's, he hadn't ignored Endeavor's success and quick rise to the number 2 spot. He felt like he's trespassed onto something private, hearing information that wasn't meant for him to hear. But who else had known? Who else was told to lower their head obediently and stay quiet about the other endeavors that surely existed in the pro-hero system? He's stricken, following Dabi's lead through the tunnels in silence. Izuku is only broken out of his stupor when Dabi opens a door to reveal the dim lights of the entrance hallway. It's an absolute mess. Shattered crystals litter the red carpet, as Izuku remembers, but now the walls look as though someone had taken a blowtorch and pressed it against the wall. Or a flamethrower. There's no trace of the attacker. You're free to go. Dabi shrugs, and the crystal mutant runs forward, not needing to be told twice. Izuku follows, a bit more hesitant. The crystal mutant halts at the door, turning around to look at Izuku. He raises his arm and gives the green-haired boy a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Look, kid." He looks incredibly embarrassed, red eyes not quite meeting Izuku's. "I know I called you stupid and an idiot for jumping in before, but thank you," he says. "I don't know how this night would have turned out if you hadn't followed me in and bought my but a few more minutes." He immediately goes to ruffle Izuku's hair, somehow further tangling his messy green curls. "You're really something else, kid. Like a true hero." Izuku is at a loss for words. He watches the crystal mutant look past him as Dabi, red eyes an expression Izuku can't quite place before he turns and walks away. The iron door opens and closes once more. And Izuku watches him leave. "Well, aren't you going to follow him?" Dabi's leaning on the wall, raising an eyebrow at him. "Did you really mean what you said before? That the pro-hero system was broken?" Izuku doesn't face Dabi. A system that lets abusers and criminals exist in isn't one that champions actual heroes. It's the same kind of hierarchy that would worship a hero for beating a man on a psychedelic break and watch him go home and beat his children. Izuku knows he's beginning to tear up, but he turns back to Dabi. The man's eyes are blank, as though he had long ago accepted that this is how things worked. They don't give a shit about us. That's how these kinds of places come to be. People here will do just about anything to survive. And these kinds of people, with nothing to lose, are great for intel jobs. "You have some kind of blood quirk, right?" Dabi indicates to his own eyes. "Your irises were bright green and your mouth was smeared with it." He points at Izuku's alarmed face. "You of all people should know how it feels like to be marginalized because your quirk isn't flashy or heroic. It's a villainous quirk." "This isn't my quirk," Izuku wants to say. "You're wrong." He chooses instead, not sure if the words are to convince himself or Dabi. "I can control myself. My quirk doesn't make me a villain. Society won't accept you. You're a homeless runaway with a dangerous ability. Your life is over before it's even begun. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off of the roof." Izuku's voice wavers, but holds fast to his resolve. Whether he was quirkless or cursed with a quirk, the options were the same. Change it then. Change it? No one's going to believe a homeless brat like you. I'll find irrefutable evidence that'll expose the commission for their crimes. Even if it's for someone as idolized as Endeavor. What you said is broken can't be beyond fixing. "Oh," Dabi says, humoring him. "And how do you plan to go about doing that?" Izuku wipes away at his tears of frustration and straightens his back. He lowers his head to Dabi. "Please allow me to work at your market." He hears Dabi laugh under his breath, removing himself from the wall to walk over to him. It's not the kind of labor suited for starry-eyed children. That's fine. No one, and I mean no one, likes people who try and topple the normalcy. You'll be hated. Izuku's fingers ghost over the slash on his hand. That's fine too. You've got crazy ideals, brat. I'll give you that. Izuku lifts his head and looks at the slight amusement running across Dabi's face. Jiren can be a bit picky with who he lets stay here, but I'm sure he'll be happy to have you on board if you pull your weight. Izuku feels a rush run through him. He's been told that he's been nothing but a useless Deku all of his life. Someone whose dreams were far too unrealistic and even pitiful. But this quirk he's been cursed with, he'll fight to make it his own. First things first though, Dabi's voice snaps Izuku from his thoughts. Izuku's heart leaps to his throat, and he can't catch his thoughts as they run wild. Is there going to be some sort of violent initiation process? Are we going to have to fight? Is he going to make me think of an alias on the spot? Dabi places a broom in his hands and pats him on the back. First task on the job, clean up the messes you make. This entryway looks like hell. Izuku holds the broom, heavy in his tired limbs, and groans. It had been 3 months since that fateful day, where Izuku had turned his back on the outside world and didn't look back. He had stood in that entryway for a long while, staring at the iron door that separated him from the life Izuku had so desperately dreamed of. To go to High School and show Mom that she didn't have to worry about his future anymore. To finally be able to stand tall as a hero, worthy of respect and recognition, and have Kaken acknowledge him once again. Like when they were younger, at a simpler time. Midoriya Izuku doesn't know if he believes in destiny. If he believes that this is how things were meant to be. He was cursed, made a criminal of awful circumstances and couldn't go back. That life he dreamed of was no longer his to seize. But Izuku was never one to falter when the odds were stacked against him. In every part of his lifetime, he's always started at a disadvantage, born with it even. Being in murder suspect outcast and quirkless couldn't be too different, right? The head of your market, Jiren, had accepted him with open arms, not so much because of Izuku's heartfelt resolve to make an impact, but because of the wealth he had brought in. It turns out the crystal mutants' biosynthesized gems were quite valuable, something about cosmetic purposes that Izuku didn't understand, so they had gladly been taken off his hands. He'd even been given a small cut of the money. His new quirks, gave him a whole new edge when it came to fighting. Faster reflexes, a burst of energy, and even limited quirk identification with the drop of blood. Realizing that he could only capitalize on it with a stronger body, he started making strides to bulk up some muscle mass. Most of those attempts involved doing copious manual labor for the locals. Dabi had taken responsibility over him, almost like an older brother. As the person that had brought him into Yoru, he was charged with training Izuku, because no one would ever listen to a scrawny, baby-faced brat like you, as he had said. He didn't hold back on his impromptu training regimen. Or that Dabi makes several close calls to instantly cremating me while I dodge in a massive panic routine, as Izuku has come to know it as. As Izuku had theorized, the downside of an adrenaline quirk was the sudden drain of energy he'd feel in long-term combat, and Dabi would gladly capitalize on that. Now, Izuku wasn't sure if Dabi did that because he actually cared for his longevity or because he found it funny to see Izuku struggle like a chicken with its head cut off. And to think Izuku thought he was such a stoic man when they first met. So Izuku learned to adapt. He learned to conserve his energy, only expend it when he felt necessary. Even when Izuku finally felt that it was safe to go outside during the daytime, he kept to himself. He kept his head down, hands stuffed in an oversized black hoodie. It was Dabi's, not his, and would only travel with purpose. To eavesdrop on nearby precincts, to read up on the news at the local library. It wasn't hard to be invisible when the world saw you as a homeless kid. Izuku had even visited his old home once before. He had leaned on the gates of his apartment complex when the sun was barely peeking from the horizon for a long while, wringing his hands together in ambivalence. The time now would be just before his mom got up for work. For as long as he could remember, it had always just been the two of them. The Midoriyas, cleaning up the mess of flour and cookie dough made in the kitchen, gushing over annual televised hero rankings in the living room, or making up names for stars on their humble apartment balcony. It had always been the two of them, struggling and surviving, and for the both of them they had always been enough. He just really misses her. In the end, Izuku had been a coward, deciding that it was more trouble than it was worth to selfishly bring himself back into her life, knowing that it wouldn't end well. He had emptied out all of the money in his pocket into her mailbox, taken one last forlorn look at the plate labeled Midoriya Residence, and ran. But Izuku always had a knack of finding trouble. Whether it would pursue him and knock him upside the head or be dropped at his feet, he always managed to find it. And it was always really, really hard for him to not intervene, which led him to his current predicament. The sound of blades clashing makes a clean sound in the air, and Izuku slides his own knife up, the blade of the other armed man getting tossed skyward. It bounces on the ground, before landing out of reach with a clang. Pickpocketing the elderly is such a cliché. Izuku wipes his blood from his lips with a hoodie sleeve, pointing the knife at the shaking man on the ground. Although they're on a relatively dead residential street, Izuku knows better than to let this drag out for too long. Seriously, don't you feel at least a little bit bad? He reaches forward as the man flinches and gently prisks the wallet from the man's fingers. Izuku glowers at the man's distraught face, eyes lit a fiery green from his quirk. You'd best not do this again, okay? Now, have a good day. The man makes no acknowledgement to his comment, crawling to his feet and running away. Izuku quickly makes his leave too, taking a brisk pace back towards the busier street. The momentous adrenaline pulsing through his body disappears in an instant, and Izuku is forced to right himself as his balance is suddenly thrown off. He was starving. Izuku rubs his eyes with the bottom of his palms and groans. He was already short on money, having used up most of his small reserve to support himself in hiding the past few months. He was running out of options. Izuku tentatively opened the wallet in his hands, eyes wandering to the humble amount of money tucked neatly inside. It's been nearly a day since he had last eaten. He makes a small, pained noise, forcing himself to look away. This could very well be someone's last meal for the day too. He couldn't do it. Izuku chooses to look at the elderly man's license instead. His eyes light up when he zones in on the lines of an address. Ignoring his growing headache, Izuku steels himself. Now, to figure out a way to discreetly give this back. His long train of thought comes to a crash as Izuku collides with a man, his already disoriented balance thrown completely off. He yelped and landed on his behind, keeping a tight grip on the wallet as the sounds of falling groceries joined him on the floor. In retrospect, it was Toshinori who wasn't looking where he was going. Although it's been months since the first few pro-hero serial murders, the controversies surrounding the deaths and disappearances were still very palpable in the media, so much so that it had even spiraled out of Toshinori's control. There were little to no leads with the continuous stream of murders and suicides. No patterns, no motive found between the murderers and victims, if they were even found at all. It's like people were being driven to the brink of insanity in an instant, abandoning their jobs, families, model lifestyles, and disappearing with the night. The happenings weren't frequent enough to change society as it was, but it had managed to make itself known as the norm, like a thorn deeply embedded in the side of daily life. It could be seen in the way people stopped traveling alone or how witnesses would refuse to open their doors for the questioning of pro-heroes. Without bringing forward a culprit, Toshinori's reassurance as the symbol of peace would mean nothing. But this was actually not at the forefront of Toshinori's mind. It plagued him for many other hours of the day, yes, but on his early lunch break a deflated Toshinori was distracted by something else. He has raided villain hideouts, saved hundreds of people in massive, scale crises, and has even gone toe-to-toe with All for One. But he could never prepare himself for the overwhelming stress of being a teacher at UA High. He thought he was well-liked with the younger generation, so why was teaching so hard? I'm so sorry, sir. He's brought back from his thoughts as the boy in front of him sputters. He's growing an incredible shade of red, which only highlights the freckles on his face. Toshinori watches him fumble about, grabbing at his now spilled container of bento. Your lunch. He reaches for his pocket, before hesitating and drawing his hand back. I don't even have money to pay you back, I'm so sorry. Toshinori's gaze softens as the child lowers his head in apology, a mess of dark green hair at his shoes. The child looks tiny in the black hoodie that swallows his whole figure. If Toshinori wasn't mistaken, this child couldn't possibly be older than his first years at UA. It's fine, young man. The fault is mine, actually. Toshinori holds an outstretched hand to help him up. The boy sheepishly reaches back. A stomach gurgle rings out through the air, freezing both of them in their tracks. Toshinori didn't think the freckled boy could turn even more red, but he somehow manages, looking absolutely mortified. He's dumbstruck as the green-haired child looks as though he's trying to fold into himself and disappear right in front of him. What's your name? He asks, because now that he's made the association of this timid boy to his first years, he doesn't think he can just walk away now. The young man doesn't answer him until he's on his feet, not quite meeting his eyes. Hisashi. He finally settles for. Hisashi. My name's Toshinori Yagi. Toshinori returns. The bento restaurant down this block has a cheap lunch special. Would you like to join me in grabbing another? Ha. Hisashi echoes, hands waving about. After making you spill your food? I couldn't possibly. Toshinori lets out a hearty laugh, clapping him on the back. Don't even worry about it. I remember how much I used to eat when I was your age, and you seem hungry enough. Hisashi turns him down the first time and even the second time, but ends up following Tashinori to Yamato Bento after his stomach growls again, even more insistent. The staff at the restaurant are surprised to see Tashinori walk back inside with a child after leaving just a few minutes ago. Tashinori ignores it, once again ordering his usual. He orders for Hisashi too, who settles for the cheapest bento on the menu. The sit-down is dreadfully long, Hisashi refusing to say a word for the entire duration. Tashinori coughs up blood at one point, and he swears that Hisashi turns 10 shades paler. Could it get any more awkward? After a long while the boy reaches for chopsticks, and Tashinori can't help but notice fresh slashes down his wrist. A hungry young man, alone, with nearly overgrown hair, clothing that didn't quite fit him and scars that chased up his arms. Tashinori felt stupid for not realizing sooner. Surely, something much more sinister was going on with this young man. He steps in to fill the silence. You know, you remind me of my students. Tashinori immediately regrets saying that, because Hisashi suddenly looks that much more uncomfortable. He brings the chopsticks closer to him, but doesn't start eating. You're a teacher, Yagi-san? He says, like he doesn't quite believe him. Is that so hard to believe? Tashinori laughs, although it seems that Hisashi is tense for other reasons he couldn't possibly know about. I'm a teacher for UA's heroics department. That definitely gets Hisashi's attention because he's practically glowing with interest, although he's still attempting to keep himself withdrawn across the table. UA? You mean the top hero academy in Japan with pro-hero faculty? That UA? Tashinori mentally slaps himself on the forehead. He got so caught in trying to draw some sort of conversation from Hisashi that he forgot he wasn't really All Might right now. Oh, of course, I'm not a pro-hero, he immediately backtracks. I'm more of a behind-the-scenes type of faculty member, which may not sound amazing, but I do get to interact with the heroics department from time to time. May not sound amazing? May not sound amazing? The freckled boy repeats, like he can't quite believe what Tashinori is saying. You're working in the alma mater of legendary heroes like All Might, a school that not only excels with its incredible hero department, but even manages to set the stage of superhero society with its equally competitive support and management departments. He sounds nearly out of breath. And Tashinori, who is absolutely astounded that he had managed to get the reserved boy to surge ahead in the conversation, says something else he'll surely come to regret. It really is an amazing school. Many alma mater like All Might have even returned to teach there too. Wait, All Might teaches at UA? And if you get to work with the heroics department, that means you must know him too. Hisashi beams. Clever kid. Accidentally slipping that tidbit of information might be bad, but Tashinori finds that he doesn't mind after seeing the green-haired boy's reaction. Maybe he was good with the high school kids. Well, is All Might as good of a person as he seems to be? Hisashi blurts out, and Tashinori is taken aback at the question. And not to interrupt you, but I mean. His voice trails off, not quite finding the right words to say. Someone who smiles that much may not be so genuine, you know? Mistrust in the pro-hero system. It chases Tashinori even here, and he feels his heart break with the question. What good was a symbol of peace if he didn't provide reassurance? He couldn't set things right with words coming from All Might, but maybe he could reassure Hisashi with words from Tashinori. All Might. Tashinori feels incredibly strange talking about himself in third person. Isn't the perfect person. Hisashi sits up at his answer, looking incredibly surprised that Tashinori had just criticized the #1 hero. He's not the greatest teacher for starters. It's his first time teaching, but he's trying his best. All Might smiles not to put up any sort of facade. It's more a sign of inner strength, to give off the feeling to yourself and others that everything will be okay. Whether it's to encourage a student to open up or save masses of people in the midst of a disaster, he would do it for others, never himself. Tashinori pumps his fist. A+ ultra to those in need of being saved. Or, so I've assumed from him. It's weird to hear someone criticize All Might like that. The boy mumbles. I've always thought of him as beyond human. Like a god. Definitely not. Toshinori laughs. But in the end, that's all that heroes are, people. The conversation petered out at the sudden arrival of their food. Toshinori couldn't be sure what Hisashi was thinking, but he looked like he wanted to say more. The green-haired boy looked distracted by the bento in front of him, taking one tentative bite before falling completely silent. Is something wrong, young man? Toshinori had managed to get Hisashi to open up, but it feels as though the process had been set 5 steps back. Toshinori can't read his expression, so it absolutely catches him off guard when Hisashi starts tearing up mid-bite. Is everything okay? Toshinori repeats, trying to quell his growing alarm. After a long while, Hisashi laughs, voice hush and reminiscent. He raises his arm to wipe his face with a sleeve, face peeking out from behind in embarrassment. They're tears of happiness, Toshinori realizes, and his heart softens at the quiet hiccups across the table. Sorry, I just haven't eaten katsudon in a while. It tastes really good. Izuku's hand traces the inside of Yoru's tunnels, absent-mindedly recalling the way back inside. At this point it was muscle memory, having walked the route plenty of times before. He ended up having to lie to Yagi-san, insisting that he was absolutely fine and had a brother that was waiting for him to come home. Which wasn't necessarily a lie. Izuku's not sure whether the gaunt man had believed him or not, because he had frowned at Izuku as he spun his half-baked truth. Yagi-san had accepted it though, simply patting him on the shoulders and telling him to take care of himself. It wasn't until Yagi-san not so subtly mentioned that he frequented this same bento shop throughout the week, so if he ever wanted to drop by and say hello, Yagi was there. Of course he wouldn't get away that easy. But Izuku didn't mind. He felt light on his feet as he made his way back to Yoru. Wallet discreetly returned to the elderly man's doorstep, his stomach full from a nice serving of his favorite meal. Izuku would consider today one of his better days. His headache had all but disappeared, a pain sated by a good conversation and a hearty meal. Toshinori Yagi was an enigma that left him scratching at his head. A teacher at UA? Izuku was almost certain that all of UA's faculty were pro-heroes, hand-picked from the cream of the crop to teach the next generation. Yagi-san could have been mistaken, of course, but the rift between instructor and something like administration made that mistake a pretty big one. Even if he was some unknown behind-the-scenes member, what business did he have being so close to All Might? But Yagi-san had even coughed up blood at one point, which had confused him even more. He hadn't tasted it, sure, but it still managed to tell Izuku one thing. Quirkless. Toshinori Yagi was quirkless, which seemed to quell most of Izuku's worries. Because there's no way a quirkless, skeletal man like Yagi-san would ever be a teacher at UA High. Much less a pro-hero at all in his lifetime. Satisfied with that answer, Izuku continued his walk into the underground. Maybe he'd write all this down in his notebook later. Bakugo Katsuki didn't hate Midoriya Izuku. Sure, he could be pretty DMN annoying. And Katsuki, having known him for so long, can name practically every part about Midoriya Izuku that got on his nerves. For one, Deku was an absolute crybaby. He could almost always tell the exact moment Deku was about to cry. He always wore his emotions on his face, in his stupid, pitiful green eyes. It was the kind of look that screamed, "Look down at me," which was exactly what Katsuki did. Katsuki was not one to pity anyone, especially not doe-eyed Deku, who would cry trying to stand up for the other weaklings getting pushed around by 4th graders. Or who would get way too sentimental, like that time he had teared up at Katsuki giving him one of his holographic All Might trading cards. The nerd knew he had duplicate. The reaction was overdramatic. Even over the years, some things never changed. It was a long ago established hierarchy in the mind of Bakugo Katsuki. The extras that flocked to Katsuki, following him like moths to a flame, would always stay extras. And Deku, who was even more beneath the faceless nobodies, a parasite that clung to the coattails of Katsuki's shadow, would always be quirkless, useless Deku. So when Katsuki had told Deku to kill himself for even a sliver of a chance at being a hero in that empty classroom, he had expected that same spineless, pitiful reaction. Deku had turned and faced him with so much conviction and frustration in his eyes, as if Katsuki had no right to be putting him in his place. And that set him off even more than it ever had before. No matter how many times he was pushed down, no matter how many times Katsuki would throw in Deku's face that he couldn't be a hero, he never thought to think with his head and not his heart. Like watching a brittle piece of glass fall apart and pull itself back together, Deku was never one to simply know when to give up and stand down. Deku loved to go on and on about how he wanted to save people as a big-shot hero. What the hell could a quirkless person do against a destructive villain? Or in a hostage situation? He just wanted Deku to think realistically for once in his FING life and wake up. Katsuki tried not to show how much Deku had bothered him on his way home, hands clenched into fists at his side. In all of his yelling and taunting, Deku had always let Katsuki's harsh words bounce off him, as if Katsuki was inferior to him. But once they were able to apply to UA, Katsuki would show him. While Deku hopelessly struggles to shoulder his way into UA, Katsuki will be there to remind him that he'll always be above him. Deku would never doubt his strength ever again. So when Midoriya Izuku came later that night frantically knocking on his door, it was the perfect storm. As though all the constants in Katsuki's life were twisting into a spiraling nosedive. Deku hadn't returned home after school. The following day, Midoriya Izuku was officially declared missing. Katsuki was alone in his apartment, his parents having left a long time ago to make sure Auntie Inko wasn't alone on the floor below them. The small woman had looked on the verge of collapsing yesterday when she had revealed that Deku hadn't even called her, which was so not like him because he always texts me to let me know if he's going to stay out late studying, and he'd never miss coming home to eat dinner with me. The panicked ramble was so characteristically Deku that it made Katsuki's stomach flip. A police officer had come in to question him, a tired-looking man with the head of an orange tabby cat. Katsuki hadn't invited him in, arm leaning on the door frame in languid interest. He told the cat man the same line he had fed Auntie Inko when she had asked yesterday. The last time I saw the nerd was on the rooftop of our middle school. Katsuki spotting Deku was coincidental, really. He had left Aldra Junior High with his bag slung over his shoulder and chin raised up high, but in the peripheral of his sight he had managed to see it. A splash of green hair against the tall bars of a fence and blue sky. It had only captured his attention for a moment, an insignificant freeze frame of his day, but Katsuki knew it was Deku. He was sitting alone, as he always was, school jacket folding against itself as he leaned against the rooftop bars. Messy, curly hair blocked Deku's face from view, but Katsuki was certain it was him. Staring up at the stretch of clouds of a perfect afternoon without a care in the world. The banter and titter of the middle E-school courtyard had swept him away from the scene. Katsuki had allowed himself to be strung back along with the crowd, back with the people who hung onto his every word. He would have never thought that he'd be the last person to see Deku before he vanished. Your mother mentioned that you and Midoriya Izuku are friends. Were you with him? The man asks him, and that question definitely breaks through his daze. Deku and I aren't friends. Katsuki grunts. For the police officer to make that assumption about them, he surely must have had a talk with his old hag downstairs. He hadn't told his mother about how he had grown apart from Deku, who used to attend every single one of Katsuki's birthday parties and play with him till sunset in the small community park in front of their complex. Katsuki had made it very clear to Deku that they weren't friends, but he doubts that Deku had told Auntie Inko the same. Midoriya Izuku and Bakuga Mitsuki were the best of friends fresh out of college. Telling the old hag that Katsuki didn't play nice with Deku anymore was one hell of a way to get his butt dragged to the Midoriya household by the ear. Just because we go to the same school, it doesn't mean we're friends. Katsuki reaffirms curtly. Katsuki is tired of telling the same demon story over and over again. He had told it to Auntie Inko, trying to quell her growing panic at his doorway. He had told it to his parents, who had prodded him for more details. Why would Midoriya be by himself on the roof? Katsuki's just about ready to close the door when Man butts in with another question. One last thing. Did Midoriya Izuku show any signs of being suicidal, of wanting to run away? This throws Katsuki off, because why the hell were they asking him? Katsuki barely qualified as an acquaintance, much less Deku's friend. They rarely ever talked, so he wouldn't have a way of really knowing. He thinks back to how Deku had looked at him in that classroom. Teary-eyed and quirkless, had he really been suicidal? But as much as he doesn't want to admit it, he knows Deku, whether he wants to or not. He knows how much the nerd wanted to get into UA, despite how many times Katsuki would snatch and throw around his prep books, and he knows how much Deku loved his mom. Deku would sooner throw his dreams into a shredder than leave her behind to break down in his absence. No, Katsuki narrows his eyes, and this time he's absolutely certain of what he's saying. Deku wouldn't off himself. Instead of bothering me with pointless questions, couldn't you put your efforts into an investigation? He had told Deku to jump off the roof. The words sit heavy in his throat, but he doesn't dare speak them. How could he tell a police officer that he had told Deku to kill himself on the same day he had gone missing? Ketman's whiskers twitch at Katsuki's comment, but he asks no more questions. We're doing the best we can, son. Your answers are going to help us look for your classmate. Yeah. Goodbye. And Katsuki slams the door with a bit more force than necessary. Because surely they were wasting their time questioning Deku's mental health rather than finding the BSTRD already. Knowing him, he'd probably gotten himself lost trying to help an old woman cross a street or some stupid shit like that. Deku wouldn't have killed himself. The imprint of Aunt Inko, hands clenched together over his own, as though pleading with him for answers, burns in his mind. Deku had better turn up soon if he didn't want Katsuki to blow him up into a million little pieces. The days blur into weeks. After nearly a month of nothing but silence and empty promises from law enforcement, Katsuki is left in a limbo of frustration and anger. Anger bubbles hot underneath his skin, making him feel restless. Like he has to get up and do something, anything. But he's left with nothing. No leads, no villains or reasoning to project his anger towards. He feels like he's going to boil over. No one could determine where Deku had gone aside from Katsuki's account. Deku's things, his bulky yellow book bag, his cell phone, his stupid hero analytics notebook he always carried on him, were left behind on that rooftop, as though they were discarded without a thought. It seemed like everyone else at Aldra Junior High was content with the story that the quirkless, bullied kid in the upper grades had given up and thrown his life away before the entrance exams. It was the most logical assumption to make. Someone had even left a vase on Deku's empty desk before class, 3 weeks after he had gone missing. It was perched on top innocently, a smooth mint vase with a single white lily peeking from its top, and it had sent Katsuki in an absolute rage. He had grabbed it by the neck, the explosion punctuating his yell as he launched it into the blackboard wall. The sound of clay shattering did nothing to satisfy his anger. He had marched back to his desk bristling, smoke emitting from his hand. He didn't bother making eye contact with the other students in the room, whose silence had risen to hushed whispers. These people were acting like Deku was already dead. These people were acting like they even cared about Deku in the first place. The clique Katsuki had surrounded himself with fell apart, like people who flee an active volcano site. He wasn't in the mood to deal with an entourage of people he barely cared to know, faces twisted with crocodile tears for the quirkless kid who had thrown himself off the roof. His classmates who had ignored Deku, pretending that they had known him deeply and cared for him, were absolute fakes. Katsuki had told them as much, to their chagrin. But Katsuki knew better. He was worse than them. He wouldn't pretend that he hadn't bullied Deku, hadn't taken every chance he could get to remind Deku of his place at the bottom. Katsuki might have been a piece of shit, but there was no way Deku could be dead. Not like this. He'd have to turn up eventually. It wasn't until Katsuki had sat down one evening, Deku's 1 month of being missing, that he had been so sure. Soda and phone in hand, he didn't pay much mind to whatever his parents were watching on the television. All might, I have a question. The high-pitched voice of the journalist is shrill to Katsuki's ears and grabs his attention. Her hair is an obnoxious green, which pisses Katsuki off nearly as much as her voice does. She's standing in front of a microphone, one hand clutching a notepad. The chatter of the press conference falls at the raise of her voice. The camera pans over to All Might, dressed down in a neat suit. Even without his hero costume, All Might still looks as an imposing #1 hero should, towering above the detective sitting beside him. All of the attention in the room was on All Might. Katsuki knew that dealing with PR was a part of being the #1 hero, but it definitely wasn't going to involve him when he became #1 in the future. His job as a hero would be to beat up villains in a blaze of victory, not to plaster on a fake smile for flashing cameras and his public image like some kind of glorified mannequin. In the comfort of his couch, he drinks his soda and continues watching. I'm sure you have by now familiarized yourself with what now has been dubbed the pro-hero serial murders. The death of politician Mizuki Kobayashi marks a mere 4 weeks since the last killing. The green-haired woman says. She points at All Might with her notepad, almost accusatory. The rate of missing persons in Japan has gone up exponentially, almost all of which turning up inconsolable or dead. People who have publicly criticized heroes are being murdered, and the public has received no answers as to why. Speculation has even gone far enough to say that rogue heroes may be silencing their critics. As the symbol of peace, what do you have to say? A camera flashes. In the sea of wires and microphones, All Might stands up in. Katsuki wonders just how blinding it must be to be at the top. I first want to say that the police have been putting forward their full efforts day and night to investigate these murders alongside pro-heroes. There has been no identifiable motives, and at this point we can't confirm that there is a trend between the increase in missing people and the targeted attacks. All Might is speaking carefully, as if every word had been meticulously strung together. I want to ensure the public that whoever is doing this will be held responsible and face the full consequence of the law. The villains who take pleasure in wreaking havoc and stirring uncertainty in the hearts of the population are the most dangerous of all. Even with the ever-beaming smile on his face, All Might's blue eyes grow intense. I have worked with many commendable pro-heroes in my lifetime and can reassure you that this distrust in the pro-hero system is displaced. Calling these incidents the pro-hero serial murders rouses the exact fear that these villains want. These villains are approaching a dead end and they will be brought to justice. All Might sits back down and the auditorium erupts in a wave of protests and arguments. It's orchestrated chaos, the crowd clamoring to get the next follow-up question. Katsuki moves to sit back in his seat, not realizing that he had been leaning forward. He feels his grip on the soda in his hand. Tighten. Deku hadn't killed himself. He has argued with teachers, his other idiotic classmates, and even with some policemen collecting testimony over that unshakable fact in Katsuki's mind. But the thought that Deku might have been killed clicks like a puzzle piece in Katsuki's head, a perfect fit in this endless month of uncertainty. The things Deku had cherished, left behind as though he had been abducted. No words shared to Auntie Inko. The perfect victim who was always alone. The can of soda explodes in his hand, and Katsuki crushes it with his fist. In the following months, Katsuki waits for the day they find Deku dead. He doesn't give a DMN about Deku, but he can't help but let it weigh on his mind. It's like waiting for someone to rip a band-aid off his arm. The image of Deku, mangled and lifeless and lost to the world, does weird things to his stomach. He waits for an inevitable knock on the door, where the police officer on the other side would tell him that they had found a body. Or for a text at school, where his old hag would tell him that Deku was gone, and that she was so sorry. But the news never comes. The news never comes, and it drives Katsuki absolutely livid. He pours himself into studying, because that's all he can do, really. Katsuki studies, tearing his way through UA mock exams and the quirk training regime he's made for himself. His calloused hands crack under the intensity of his quirk, feeling exposed and raw. Deku had been right there. Katsuki had seen him, saw him for the last time before he had vanished without a trace. He couldn't even look Auntie Inko in the eye. Because maybe, just maybe, if he had been more observant or a little less of an a-hole, Deku would still be here. The image of Deku in his mind, watching the clouds, would be burned into his mind forever. Katsuki always knew that their relationship was irreparable. But for Deku to simply be present, to be nerding out about villains and mumbling and breathing, would be enough. He effed up. He really effed up. Katsuki used to always tell Deku that he'd be the hero that would always win. His head is tormented with the fact that in his arrogance, to a faceless villain that had taken Deku away, he had utterly and completely lost. Katsuki knows he's been accepted to UA before he even tears open the sealed envelope. He's confident in how much he's pushed himself to be a better hero than anyone before him. Finishing the entrance exam in any place lower than first was out of the question. Through all of the twists of the past year, Katsuki seizes his place in UA and holds to it tight like a lifeline. He won't let this slip away from him. The news on the serial murderer is radio static. Even with all of the protective measures put into place, all of the death All Might and the police manage to prevent, no criminal is brought forward. The positive reception and cheers for All Might, who had only excelled in damage control, set Katsuki off. There is no justice, no overwhelming victory. No closure for him or the grieving mother who lives on the floor below Katsuki's apartment. Watching the canned video of All Might congratulating him for his acceptance, Katsuki can't let go of the thought that All Might had failed Deku too. All Might is Katsuki's heroics teacher. At a simpler time, Katsuki would have been excited, ecstatic even, to be receiving instruction from All Might. This man was the biggest wall in the world, second to none for as long as Katsuki could remember. He's even owned a hoodie of the guy when he was younger, for FS sake. It was All Might's first time ever instructing a class. Even the upper levels before him didn't get that same opportunity. But now this creeping feeling of disdain, like a murmur in the back of his head, grows louder and louder. Katsuki's fist clenches against the desk he's sitting at in this classroom, nails grating against the surface. Sure, his emotions might be misdirected, but Katsuki was never one to hold back voicing how he felt. Shinso Hitoshi finishes his introduction to the class from behind Katsuki. He had mentioned something about undergoing separate instruction under Aizawa sensei, but by the warm reception of his classmates he assumed eyebags had said something mundane and not worth remembering. Katsuki barely lets All Might do so much as say his name before he stands up, the classroom chair screeching against the floor. He stuffs his hands into his pockets and clears his throat. "I'm Bakugo Katsuki." He shifts his weight to one leg, lip curling up in a snarl. "Let it be known to all the extras in this room, I'm going to be the irrefutable #1 hero. My victory is going to be so absolute that villains won't even think about committing crime without eating a blast to the face." He lifts a hand, pointing at the #1 hero in front of the chalkboard. "And I'll even surpass you, All Might." The classroom is frozen with a stunned silence. Even All Might, smiling as brightly as ever, is left speechless. Then the tone immediately explodes, shocked voices bombarding him from all fronts. A snicker breaks out, Mina's pink hand trying to muffle her growing laughter. What kind of introduction was that? Mineta screeches. Ida looks like he's about to shoot up from his seat. Rude behavior like that is absolutely unacceptable at UA. Is this guy insane? Ojiro says sheepishly. Now, All Might's trying to pull the class back in, but it's painfully obvious that he's never been in the position of a teacher before. Katsuki falls back into his chair, satisfied with All Might's stunned reaction. "Be annoyed by me. It'll make it that much more satisfying when I pass you." I'm sure there wasn't any malicious intent behind his words. All Might laughs, to Katsuki's disbelief. The drive to set your standards high and be the greatest hero you can be is already commendable in itself. Think about what pushes you forward to grasp that image of victory and use it to motivate you throughout your time here at UA. All Might couldn't possibly know how much of a nerve that struck in Katsuki. He swears he can feel the vein bursting from his head. "I look forward to working with you and fostering your growth, Bakugo Shonen." "Hey Bakugo, wait up." Katsuki's eyes roll so far back in his head that he's convinced he can hear them grate against his skull. He stops in his steady pace home from UA's gates, not bothering to turn around. He recognizes the tone of the red-haired loud guy in his class. How can he not, after all, since this is the 5th day in a row the DMN guy has attempted to flag him down. "What the f do you want, shitty hair?" Katsuki says. If gazes could burn through people, he'd be sure that shitty hair would be a pile of ashes on the ground right now, but the red-haired boy stops instead and has the audacity to look surprised. "Oh, didn't expect you to actually respond this time." Kirishima breathes, the smile growing on his face. Katsuki has half a mind to blow Kirishima's head off. I'm not in the mood to watch you trail after me like a lost effing duckling again today. Say your piece and off. No need to explode on me, blasty. Kirishima puts his hands up in mock surrender, the toothy shark smile ever still present on his face. I just wanted to talk about the big explosion you did for Aizawa-sensei's quirk endurance test. It was really awesome, man. Kaken, sugoi. Deku had cheered, a grin blooming from his cheeks, young and spotted with tiny freckles. Of course it was amazing. Katsuki grunts. Did you seriously come over here just to tell me something I already knew? No. I actually wanted to bring up this great idea I had. He pounds his fists together, Kirishima's arms clashing against each other with the activation of his quirk. I was thinking we could totally train together. Think your explosions can stand up to my hardening? Hell no. Katsuki deadpants, beginning to walk off. Pretty sure I have FING punching bags stronger than you. Why the hell would I go through the trouble of helping you out? Kirishima catches up to him, as though he were expecting the reaction. Ah, come on blasty. And don't go making up stupid nicknames for me. I didn't even make up that name, Mina did. We could be great, man. I said no. I could totally take it. Are you too effing dumb to know what no means? Bakugu. I said if off. Katsuki violently shouts. He pivots on his foot, a blast emitting from his clawed hand. It's a warning shot, angry with all bark and no bite, aimed at the empty space next to Kirishima's head. He's surprised at the contact his hand makes to Kirishima's raised arms, the heat erupting back towards him. Kirishima had stepped forward and taken his blow head-on, locking his elbows together in a defensive position. What the F was wrong with this guy? Kirishima is panting, but his hardening holds to Katsuki's surprise. He has that same stupid smile on his face when he brings his arms back down. See? He exhales through his nose. Your explosions couldn't break through my defense. Ha! That was me going easy on you, shitty hair. He laughs dryly. If I showed you the real deal, I'm sure it would wipe that smug look off of your DMN face. Katsuki had to admit, shitty hair had ball. Ever since he had been in Class 1A, barely anyone had spoken to him beyond formalities. Sure, there was Four Eyes, who wouldn't hop off his case about bad language, or Pikachu, who seemed to have a death wish poking fun at him. His class was mostly a blur of faces he couldn't be bothered with remembering. But Shitty Hair was the only one who was relentless in his attack to get Katsuki to so much as acknowledge him. Katsuki wasn't about to let anyone drag him down from his climb to the top. But this. A sparkle reaches Kirishima's eyes, and this time Katsuki doesn't find it in himself to be annoyed. So, is that a yes to training with me then? The walls Bakugu Katsuki had built around himself, tall and menacing to scare away anyone who dared to get close, didn't faze Kirishima. This was different from the extras that had trailed him in the past, never daring to get too close. He had told himself he wouldn't let anything distract him. But Kirishima, gutsy, loud, and even a bit annoying, lit a competitive fire in Katsuki. He sneered, allowing Kirishima to match his pace. Do you want to die? A screen fizzles to life. A figure wrings his hands together in front of him, as though he was never quite able to break that nervous tick of his. He leans forward on the table he's seated at, and where the camera sits across him. The quality of the video is downright awful, light barely flickering across the figure's concealed face in the dim room. He's wearing a simple black mask, black hood pulled over his head. Strands of curly hair peek out from the top. From the video quality, it's hard to discern anything more than the striking bright eyes the figure has, even in the monochromatic light. He's nervous, that much is obvious. The boy clears his throat and steels himself. His voice begins statusy, like it's been modified. Hi, to whoever's watching this from the Muzutafu police force. If I'm being honest, I didn't want to do this. Information at this scale is a bit too much out of my pay grade. It might be easier, even safer, to just mind my own business. But it's not in my nature to stand by and wait for things to take a turn for the worst. The voice is low, statusy, and nearly discernible. Your personal biases and blind trust in every hero stops you from seeing them as people who are equally capable of corruption, who have their own motivations and won't hesitate to endanger the faculty and students they work with. Midoriya Izuku sits up, trying not to let his voice waver. Because after he gives this tape to the police, he knows that he'll no longer have the anonymity he cherishes. There's no turning back. UA has a traitor amongst its ranks. Tell All Might your students are in danger. Be ready. Your market could be considered Izuku's new family. When he had first started living here, he had thought it was his dead end, the only place he had left to turn to as a murderer with a dangerous quirk. At night, your market was a hub of criminal activity. A constant stream of rumors and whispers flowing up and down the aisles, a white noise of secrecy and even high-strung anticipation always in the air. Izuku isn't a stranger to the atmosphere, now welcomed in it even as he trails alongside Dabi. For the most part, everyone's heard of Dabi's new charge, the kid in a black hoodie who always seemed to be taking notes. Quick to pick up little nuances in information exchange. Smart, although greenhorned, sleep, deprived, and a bit jumpy. Yor had a different kind of feeling during the day, something a bit more familiar and warm to Izuku. When the business part of the hub retreated, like shadows crawling away from sunlight, Izuku felt like he was able to see Yoru for what it really stood for. Outcasts. Many people, families even, left at their own dead ends like him. People who have run, hid and escaped out of sight into the catacombs of a dimly lit city microcosm. The mentally ill, the homeless, and the ostracized thrived in the artificial lights of Yoru, maybe not happy but surviving. He's not sure as to whether Dabi fell along those lines, being singled out for the circumstances that were move upon them. And that was what Izuku could most sympathize with. So when he temporarily ran out of money, the community had opened their arms to him and helped provide him with food. As good company as Yagi-san was, which he was guilty of meeting more occasionally than he'd like to admit, bugging him for lunch all the time was surely one way of getting himself dragged to CPS. Izuku raises a towel to wipe his neck, still reeling from his regular training session with Dabi. Usually his exhaustion would wear down on his talkativeness, but today was different. He hid his hands behind his back in a not-so-casual stroll, approaching the sitting figure on the ground. Today, he was a man on a mission. Do you want a butter roll? Ms. Suzuki let me take an extra one this morning. Izuku bends over to Dabi's height, waving said bread roll in his face. I had to agree to watch her baby for a solid week, but I think it was worth it. Dabi grunts, not paying Izuku mind and sticking the bread in his mouth. He traces a hand over the staples on his arm, not suspicious yet. Izuku falls into a crisscrossed sit beside him, pulling out a worn journal onto his lap. He clearly has no intention to eat. Dabi isn't sitting too close next to Izuku, but he can feel the aftermath of his quirk like a furnace burning out. Izuku swallows his nerves and clears his throat. So, Izuku leans his head against the concrete wall and whistles. I heard you have a job with information about UA tonight. Dabi doesn't even look at him, plucking some bread from his mouth. Yeah, and it doesn't concern you. Izuku deflates a bit, but this wasn't surprising. Even though they had gotten to know each other for the past few months, Dabi never wanted to take him along anywhere. He seemed to trust Izuku enough. Sure, Dabi had threatened him to never speak of Endeavor's wife to anyone, but the threats were mostly empty, but always left him behind to roam the night alone. How was Izuku going to change anything if he spent his time waiting around for Dabi all day? Aside from the gossip about Endeavor, the most he had been able to scour for was a sudden increase in large-scale damage to neighborhoods. Carelessness wasn't enough to prove anything. He was restless, brain demanding more stimulus and hands desiring to do something more besides snap pencil tips against his notebook. So, no, Izuku wouldn't relent. Izuku flips open his notebook to his very detailed notes on himself, leaning on his hatches. If you just hear me out, your quirk is cremation, right? It's an intense long-range emitter quirk. Dabi rolls his eyes as Izuku holds the notebook in front of him. My quirk can be investigative. It's more prepared for close combat than yours because it experiences a positive feedback loop. The more I bleed, Maybe Izuku shouldn't sound so enthusiastic about getting himself hurt, but his eyes sparkle with determination. The more capable I am in a fight. The last idea, he purposely omits, isn't a concept he got from studying himself. It's a conclusion he came to long, long ago by studying Kaken. The more he would move, the more sweat he would generate, and the stronger his explosions would become. It was one of the many reasons why Kaken was so amazing. We cover each other's weaknesses. And no one knows your attack patterns better than I do. Izuku snaps himself from the Kaken thought train in his head, concentrating on wearing down Dabi. Why, not the best team player too, so I'm pretty sure no one else would be willing to work with you. He quickly adds. It would almost be a year since he had disappeared. It was childish and selfish, but a part deep down inside Izuku wished that he could still be a part of Kaken's life. To watch him struggle and fight to become a hero that always wins. Because the only person that believed that he could be that type of hero more than Izuku was Kaken himself. He wondered how Kaken was doing. Dabi, unaware of Izuku's internal musings, glares at him. In case you've forgotten, I'm not going out to jump someone. It's a simple talk. They specifically asked for me, so this job is pretty and important. He points at Izuku, who pouted. Think about it. Your baby face and good manners aren't going to intimidate anyone. I have thought about it. Izuku protests. I just think and do nothing but sit on the sidelines and listen. You took me in because you saw that I had potential, right? He puts on a smile, trying to trick the jittery fear inside of him. He wasn't going to sit by and be useless any longer. I meant every word when I said I'd fix the way. Don't make me say your alias. Dabi pinches the bridge of his nose between his fingers. Seriously, brat, if you remind me of that demon name again, I'm going to lose my mind. It makes it sound like you're pretending to be a hero. The way people see corrupt heroes. Or the way people look at outcasts like Ms. Suzuki, or every other person who needs help at your. Izuku pointedly ignores Dabi's comment, because he likes his alias, dang it. If it sounds like a hero's name, then that just makes it even better. Even if I can make a small difference, I've got to do my best. Besides, I don't have to be intimidating. It'll be like a good cop and bad cop type of job. Again, you watch way too many movies. Not to mention that I know a lot about UA. I've been studying it for a really long time, even before living here. I've even tried sketching out the layout in my journal from visitor accounts, so if anyone gives you any faulty information, I'd be able to cross-check and make sure you aren't being lied to. I think I have a list of some faculty somewhere in here too. You know what? Fine. Izuku looks up from rummaging through his notebook, already prepared papers slipping out from the pages. Fine. He says. Dabi stops him. I'll let you come on one condition. Always a catch. One condition? Izuku echoes, doing an awful job of hiding his elation. No talking. If you end up running your mouth like you always do, we'll get nowhere. Let me handle it and don't get in the way. Izuku's JRK response is a wholehearted no, but then he stops to consider it. Compared to the past few months, this was a very big step forward. At the very least, he could be acknowledged somewhere beyond the confines of Yoru. Sure, sometimes words ended up slipping away from him, but 10 minutes of silence spectating a chat should be no problem. That sounds fair. Good. Dabi says. He rises from the floor, waving the unfinished bread at Izuku. You're lucky that I've gotten tired of your complaining. And that Suzuki makes great bribery food. You can at least share with me if you're going to tease me. Nope. Bribery food is bribery food. Why, you're really going to be like that? Have fun babysitting. I've heard Suzuki's kid is more of a brat than you are. Dabi. Izuku walks alongside Dabi, practically buzzing in his red shoes in excitement. It's almost comedic how different he looks compared to the taller man besides him, who has slowed to a lazy stroll. They look like an incredibly unlikely duo, juxtaposed on the lonely night park trail they're walking on. Few streetlights hang over their heads, flickering in clear neglect and age from between the trees. On this disused, hidden path in the dead of night, no one is around. For the entire duration of the walk, Izuku had talked Dabi's ear off to his absolute disdain. It was technically not breaking their agreement, so Dabi had simply grit his teeth and tolerated it. He would never admit it to the brat, but in the few months they had coexisted together, Izuku had grown on him. There was something very eager about the kid, which Dabi had picked up immediately from day one. He was idealistic to a fault. Because to Dabi, it took a special type of crazy person to be at the bottom and say, I can make a change. Dabi had meant to exploit that childish dream and use it for his own agenda. At the end of the day, Izuku was just a child desperate to prove his worth in a world that couldn't accept him. But what was once a ploy to leech labor from a wide-eyed brat grew into something that could be distantly called fondness. Or maybe it's because it's more useful to keep the kid around. Yeah, it made more sense to chalk it up to that. Plus, Izuku was the only other person who knew about the situation with his shitty father and Rei Todoroki. Keeping him close would just be extra insurance that he wouldn't squeak. But he doubts Izuku would endanger an abuse victim, if anyone. He's sure that Izuku would try and move heaven itself if it meant he could save one innocent person. And resolve like that made him interesting to keep an eye on. He interrupts the kid's chatter about Yue next to him. Izuku sputters when Dabi suddenly holds his arm out, face crashing into his offending hand. We're here. Remember what you promised. Izuku gulps, straightening his posture and effectively shutting up. Across from the duo is a man with a mask, scales peeking out from behind. One man. Transformation quirk. Huh? What's up with the other guy? The chameleon man says. He looks nervous, even a bit angry at Izuku's presence. You said this was going to be a one-on-one thing. He's harmless. Don't pay him any mind. Dabi approaches the man, leaving Izuku behind him. You asked specifically for me, right? Tell me your piece and then I'll think about whether it's worth paying you for. Right. The chameleon man mutters, a bit antsy on his feet. Were the people Dabi met always this nervous? The feeling lingering in the air makes Izuku feel the same. I'll make this quick. I'm with an organization known as the League. They're trying to make a statement against UA High in a few days. They even have a warp quirk user that can get you right into a training facility of theirs. Many members of the League are coming, and we've even hired your kind people too, if you don't think we're trustworthy. It's a great opportunity to knock some heads. All of this and even more trusted information from a source inside of UA. They just want you to rec sheet. I don't know the exact details, but I can pass the message to my boss if you're interested. A training facility? Izuku leans forward in interest, very much concentrating on not blurting out the question. Information on the interior of UA was big. It had taken Izuku days of reading and years of following the school obsessively to have so much as a vague picture of it in his mind. UA was a fortress, sitting on the tallest hill of the largest forest in Mizudafu away from civilization. The school was equipped with security cameras, electronic ID cards, and high security at its perimeter. They had a literal alarm and barrier for the media that tried to push their way in on a basis. Information on the inside was invaluable. Dabi doesn't fall for it. Access to a source in the most prestigious hero school in the country must have one hell of a steep price. I assume your boss sent you to ask me something specifically. Your information on the flame hero. Word is that you know something big. About someone personal to him that could absolutely break him. We just want a location and a name. A shiver runs through Izuku as the villain steps forward, voice sounding more demanding. Shigaraki Tamura wants to know, and won't take no for an answer. That sounds more like a threat instead of a request. It puts Izuku on alert, shoulders tensing under a black hoodie. He knows the value of Endeavor's secret, fully understanding why villains trying to knock him down would want it. But Izuku knows he wouldn't be able to live with himself if Endeavor's victim wife was harmed because of his carelessness. And he knows Dabi felt that same. And then he hears his quirk, a quiet voice in the back of his head. It's almost like a sixth sense, ice crawling up his veins. Something's wrong. Dabi, he begins. I don't care who's asking. That's only for me to know. Dabi pointedly ignores Izuku, sounding said that he had broken their previous agreement. Run back to Shigaraki and tell him this goes way beyond just Endeavor. There's another person here. Dabi. Izuku's voice pitches, and that's when everything happens at once. The wind is knocked out of Izuku and he's crashing, head knocking on the dirt as a weight overtakes his chest. A girl, a high school girl, is straddling him, black stockings locking him to the ground. She's adorned in school uniform, with buns twirled in her hair and a smile complementing a pretty face. If it were a simpler time, he'd dare say she was cute. These are the only things he manages to assess before she stabs a box cutter into his palm. Izuku bites his tongue to stop himself from screaming. "Fixer!" It takes Izuku a moment to realize that's Dabi saying his name, and he slams his head down. He fully expects the billowing blue heat above him, the girl jumping off Izuku with amazing reflexes. The chameleon, like villain, disappears from the corner of his eye, camouflage raised as he slithers forward on the dirt ground. Dabi leads with his left arm, fire bursting towards the disguised villain, leaving Izuku on his own. He's standing, bringing the blood on his palm to his mouth. He analyzes the girl. Her full attention is on him, and he's taken aback when her cheeks flush pink. The high school girl looks like she's on top of the world, holding her sweater's sleeve to her face. Fixer? That's such a funny name. But wow, Fixer. She gushes. You've got a blood quirk too, right? That's so fun, we're like a match made in heaven. Her box cutter gleams in the moonlight, stained with his blood. I'm Toga. Toga Himiko. Shigaraki said we only had to bring the other guy intact, so let's have some fun. Do your best to bleed for me, okay? Izuku brandishes his own rusted knife, incredibly unnerved as Toga darts forward with complete murderous intent. Toga is graceful and coordinated, moving about as if she was dancing. She weaves in and out with every stab at his body, Izuku forced to retreat backwards. Determination knits Izuku's face tight, and he shoulders past the slicing at his appendages, patient. Toga is overwhelming with her reflexes and speed, but Izuku's playing the long game. He just needs one good strike. His eyes widen when he recognizes the small window of opening, and Izuku leads with his knife, cutting through air. She throws her head back to dodge the blade at her face. He breathes heavily at the poignant scent of someone else's blood, Toga's cheek dripping red. Even then, it's not enough. They need an opening to run before things get ugly. She hops back, a flushed smile still plastered on her face. You're so cute, all cut up, do you know that? You kinda remind me of me as a freshman. Trying to play nice. Trying to pretend that my quirk didn't nearly push me over the edge every time somebody bled the smallest drop of blood. Toga brings a finger to her open wound, smudging the blood to her chin. I remember the first time I drank a person's blood. It's an indescribable feeling. At first you try and smother it by starving yourself, and then drinking animals, and then even drinking your own blood. She says. But even then it's not enough. It's never going to be enough. So that's why I've decided to live my own way from now on. Loving in my own way, and killing in my own way too. This deeply unnerves Izuku. He was never able to speak to anyone about his new quirk, so seeing someone like him, saving things like that, hit way too close to home. Toga Himiko was a girl speaking from experience, and Izuku was living in the thick of it. He didn't need to be told how euphoric and relieving it was to drink a person's blood, because he had already done it himself, once before. A wobbly smile finds its way onto Izuku's face, and he clenches his fists. A smile is a sign of inner strength, to reassure yourself that everything will be okay. I'm nothing like you, Toga Himiko. Toga giggles, rushing at him once again. But hey, Fixer. I can tell it isn't your first time drinking someone else's blood. You're special. Deflowered like me. I'm a great listener, so you can tell me all about it while I cut you up. Don't hold back, it'll just get worse later on, you know? She returns his smile, flashing her sharp canines. So let's help each other. He looks around, green eyes catching sight of Dabi warding off the other villain trying to get close. With two people, the League sent a pair of villains to outnumber and kidnap one. What would have happened if he wasn't distracting Toga? The purple-skinned man's flames were slowing down, a telling sign that he was overheating. You should see how crazy you look right now. Toga laughs, matching Izuku's steps as he races towards Dabi. I think it makes you seem really, really cool. Oi Dabi, Izuku gasps. His red shoes skid on the ground as he keeps on evading. We can't get away like this, you have to set the trees on fire. Dabi whips his head towards him incredulously, as though Izuku had just lost his demon mind. At the other's firm nod, it clicks. A smile of realization stretches across Dabi's face, tugging at the staples digging into skin. Clever brat. He laughs, raising his overheated arm into the air. Blue fire engulfs the path, hot air rising and sking the clearing dry of the cool night breeze. It's a brilliant showcase of Dabi's power, smoke rising from the man as the flames reach up to lap at the overhanging trees. Ignited branches begin to drop from the sky, one landing dangerously close to Izuku. It's not the falling debris that serves as a warning but the far distant sound of police sirens that ring out, piercing through the formerly sleepy trail. Izuku's forced smile is now one of relief, because this means they've noticed. It was their last case scenario, but there was less time to coordinate for a kidnapping. It means that they were all going to have to run their separate ways. Toga is more level-headed than Izuku thought she was, because she immediately stops her assault. Huh? Well, that's no fair. She pouts, holding her box cutter close to her nose. I really wanted to get to know you more, Fixer. Friends shouldn't call the cops on each other. But I'll forgive you just this once. Toga spins in her heel, neatly sheathing the offending weapon. Lizard face. The chameleon villain jumps at Toga's voice, her tone suddenly shifting from its girlish pitch to a dangerous low. I'm going to go now because I don't really feel like getting scooped up by the police. Toga gives a little polite wave, normal had it not been for the blood-covered weapon still in her grip. Bye Dabi. Bye-bye Fixer, I'll see you later, 'kay? Let's talk again soon. And just like that, Toga swiftly makes her exit into the woods, leaving behind her comrade without a care. Izuku figured she wasn't the cooperative type, but even then she managed to surprise him. Dabi does nothing to stop the said villain, stepping to the side with a passive face. Izuku stares in disbelief. That was it? They were just going to let him go? Izuku doesn't hesitate to immediately pivot and dive forward, hand catching the chameleon man's tail before he can disappear into a camouflage. He flickers back into view as a very angry Izuku hovers over him. By the distance of the sound, he has a few minutes before anyone will arrive. He can't walk away without asking. You said that you had a source in UA and that you were going to knock heads, right? Izuku rasps out, electric green eyes darkening. For a group to break into a training facility rather than just the campus itself, that means that you're targeting students specifically. Izuku wasn't the same hero fanboy he was a year ago, sure, but he could never support recklessly attacking innocent hero students. Kids that could be as young as him. Izuku would never call himself an angry person. That title was reserved for people like Kaken, who could welcome and relish in the feeling of exploding, raging against anyone in the vicinity. It was a feeling Izuku had never expressed outwardly. Even when he was being bullied, kicked to the ground and ignored by bystanders, Izuku wasn't angry at his bullies. It had always been an emotion he had felt inwardly. Anger at himself for not being better. For not being stronger. But this was different. The adrenaline pumping through his body, fresh from a fight, didn't help the tumbling snowball that was his feelings. He thinks of Yagi-san getting caught in the crossfire and he only sees red. The chameleon villain can't seem to catch his breath. Well, that's? If you're using a quirk that can warp massive amounts of villains, Izuku's grip tightens, the sirens nothing but background noise to his quiet anger. Then this has to be more than just a mindless field trip to beat up high schoolers. The chameleon man doesn't answer. Hey, are you coordinating some attack? People who could be as young as Kaken were in danger. Hey, answer me. Yagi-san was in danger. Dabi roughly grabs Izuku by his shoulder, practically yanking him backwards off the man. He's dazed from the high, heart pumping in his chest as he snaps out of it. He blearily realizes his hand had been gripping the villain's throat. His other hand taut on his knife. He's not going to talk if you don't let him breathe. Dabi hisses, grip tight and grounding on Izuku. Even in a situation like this, Dabi's ever stoic, a moment of annoyance flitted in his expression. We have to go now. Dabi doesn't wait for an answer, pulling Izuku up to his feet. Izuku follows behind, trying to concentrate on not feeling like he's having an out-of-body experience. His heart palpitates to his heavy steps, red and blue lights flashing at the edges of his vision. The stench of Toga's blood, still on his weapon, stuck to him, follows him out of the clearing too. He tries hard not to think about Toga's words, or the sudden urge he had to just stick the knife into the villain's jugular vein right then and there. "You're not warning Yue," Dabi says in front of him, once they're safe in the remote tunnels of Yur. Izuku raises his head to object, but Dabi immediately interrupts him like he expects it. Who the hell is going to trust the tip of a homeless kid that the most safeguarded school in the country is going to be infiltrated? Be realistic, brat. You'll just be bringing in unwanted attention to yourself. Don't try and mess with the League, or they'll come after you. And don't try and mess with the Commission, or they'll come after you too. Izuku lowers his head and clamps his mouth shut. "You're less chatty than usual, young man," Tashinori says, continuing to pick at the rice of his bento. Izuku sits across from him, at their usual corner of Yamato bento, antsy in his seat. He's dressed down in a plain white graphic T-shirt, careful to switch up his wardrobe so as to not give Tashinori any reasons to be suspicious. Especially with how frequently he finds himself wandering here for lunch. "I thought for sure that you'd be going on and on about Present Mike's quirk canned A this morning, but it seems like something else is pressing on your mind." Tashinori puts down his chopsticks, giving Izuku a soft but careful look. "Do you want to talk about it?" Izuku thinks back to Dabi's words, stinging even now from days ago. And no, it's nothing too serious. He wants to believe that Tashinori will take his words seriously, despite what Dabi had said. But even if he did, then what? If Izuku was wrong, then Tashinori would surely see him as a liar, or a troubled child with some vendetta against Yue. And if Izuku was right, the thought makes his stomach flip. How could he possibly explain that he knows such sensitive information without getting interrogated? "Hey Yagi-san, your workplace full of the students you lovingly talk about all the time is going to be attacked soon. I don't know when or exactly where, but just don't ask how I know it will. Just a heads up. It's ridiculous." He looks down at his dish of half-eaten katsudon and doesn't meet Tashinori's eyes. As selfish as it was, Izuku didn't want to lose this. Dabi was great company, absolutely, but the lunches he spent here were different. In the light of midday, sitting across a man who treated him like the kid he really was, Izuku could actually feel like a person. Like himself or what he used to be. He wasn't runaway Midoriya Izuku, with deep ties to the underground world and a growing criminal record, but rather his father's namesake. Quirkless fanboy Hisashi who kept up with all the recent hero happenings and could talk your ear off about the entire legacy of All Might from beginning to present. That's who he wanted Yagi-san to know him as. "Just have a busy week ahead of me," Izuku mumbles, raising a hearty piece of pork cutlet with his chopsticks. "I see." A glint reaches Tashinori's eyes, although Izuku doesn't notice. The young man had been in a downcast mood the entire lunch hour, which was incredibly unusual this far into their weekly meetings. "I hope your week isn't too busy, young man, because I actually have a surprise for you." Tashinori reaches into his bag and pulls out a lanyard with a small card attached to it. Izuku takes it, turning it over in his grip with curiosity. UA High School Visitor Pass. Izuku's jaw drops, the card shaking in his grasp. Yagi-san lets out a hearty laugh that draws the attention of the whole restaurant, happy with Izuku's sudden wide-eyed expression. "The first time we met, you told me all about UA, remember? You knew so much about it, and even taught me fun facts about the school that I didn't even know. It was part of his job." Izuku's barely listening though because oh my god, I'm going to be able to step foot in UA, and meet all the pro heroes that work there, and maybe even get to meet All Might? First years of the heroics course will be undergoing a disaster rescue simulation hosted by the Pro Hero 13. It's early in their hero education, but it's a great way to see how they'd act and use their quirks in an unforeseen disaster. It's a lesson that UA has poured resources into planning for quite some time now. I thought you'd be interested in spectating. An isolated training facility hosting a specialized lesson. Toshinori is blissfully unaware of how scared Izuku is when he connects the dots. You've been nothing but kind to me, Hisashi, brightening my lunch hour, but I think it would be good for you to talk to people your age. Toshinori says to him. Class 1A and you both have a passion for heroics, and I couldn't think of a more stellar class of young men and women to introduce you to. Izuku feels like he's being handed the key to a live bomb. A bomb that only he knew was going to detonate. And Toshinori had done it so reassuringly, because how could he possibly know that this was going to fall apart? His thoughts are running away from him. Izuku's brain picks at everything that could go wrong, because things are always going wrong. He's bearing this information alone, because Dabi didn't want to work with him. Nobody would surely believe him. It's just Izuku and a countdown only he can see hanging over Yagi-san's head, ticking down ominously. Toga Himiko's voice whispers her promise to kill without any discretion. Here was his opportunity to step up to protect Yagi-san. He had to take it. I'd love to. Izuku blurts out, clutching the pass close to his chest. I mean, I'd really like the chance to see UA and meet the hero students. That's incredibly kind of you, Yagi-san. Toshinori looks delighted, a single clap emitted between his palms. That's great to hear. I hope I'm not pushing this onto you. I do think it's a good opportunity, perhaps something you can put onto a resume. Right. Izuku remembers his manners, calming himself down. The thought that he may be recognized runs through his mind, but he immediately squashes it. He's been missing for a year, roaming around without being spotted. No one would remember Midoriya Izuku. It's an incredible opportunity. Thank you for thinking of me. There was only one other way he could pass along this information and be taken seriously. The model of the camcorder is ancient, but Izuku carries it underneath his black hoodie like it's worth $1 million. It might as well be anyways, since the price had managed to eat away at quite a large sum of his savings. It's not a problem for him. You can't put a price value on something that may help someone, even if it has the smallest chance of doing so. Dabi's gone for the night, which gives Izuku the perfect opportunity to do this without him knowing. To record and drop off the camcorder anonymously to the nearest police station. UA High itself would be impossible to get in touch with, so he settles for smaller. He just hopes his message comes out loud and clear. He slips a surgical mask over his face, black cloth hiding the freckles that litter his face. Hopefully it'll help obscure how nervous he is too. The answer had been staring Izuku in the face this entire time. Up until the past year, Izuku has always dreamed of being a hero. He wanted to be a dependable #1 hero like All Might. A man who could save dozens of people with a smile on his face. He had chased that dream with such fervent tenacity, like that man who had cursed him with this quirk had said. All he was left with was a murder he couldn't even remember, and a quirk that was driving him to insanity. But this couldn't be the end for him. He wanted to be useful to the world. He wanted to make up for his wrongdoings. Even if it meant sacrificing his anonymity for it. He places a piece of paper tape on the camcorder and writes a name along the side. Izuku would gladly break himself over and over again to do what was right. He takes a deep breath and presses the record button. Big sis? Izuku calls out to the air. The green-haired boy looks around the narrow walkway of the market, red sneakers skidding as he sweeps around in a circle. He kicks up dirt from the ground, people squeezing past him to make their way through. Black hoodie pulled over his head, Izuku looks tiny compared to the assembly of passers-by. Besides the occasional glance his way, no one paid Izuku any mind. It was rare, out of the ordinary to see a kid roaming the more seedier avenues of Yoru, but Izuku was long used to this particular area of the hub, comfortable to walk around without Dabi's accompaniment. He moves forward with purpose, bumping past the occasional person. This crevice of Yoru was where the most money and information and secrets floated around, tucked and hidden under every lantern light and oak cabinet nook. Izuku wasn't too fond of this underground sector, on the account that some people here saw violence as less of a job and more as a pastime, but Izuku found himself here more often than not. It used to be more busy and full of more eager workers, but it seemed like there were less and less people nowadays, as per Dabi. But even so, it was still teeming with untapped potential. It was the best place to listen in as an informant. There were even rumors that people in higher power would anonymously wander in, looking for workers to take on the jobs no one wanted to dirty their hands with. The only people who'd take such high-risk jobs were the ostracized that couldn't afford to say no. That's the way the world works. Dabi had told him once more, which had made Izuku only bite his lip and bury his head deeper into his notebook. If a hero wanted to make someone disappear in anonymity, this was the place to be. This was where all the mercenaries resided. Izuku's eyes light up at the shock of burgundy hair peeking above the crowd, his small frame quickly weaving to get past. Magna was seated, leg pulled up on a stool as she loudly chats to someone standing beside her. "Hey, big sis." He calls again, waving animatedly. "Oh, look who it is." Her voice coos. Magna beams, and Izuku flushes as he's pulled into an enthusiastic hug, swung around like he weighs no heavier than a wet puppy. "It's Fixer now, right? How's my favorite little shadow of Dabi?" The burgundy-haired woman whips her head around in searching. "Did he not come along with you today? He should know by now that running from my hugs doesn't work." No, just me. Sorry to disappoint you, big sis Mag." Izuku smiles, prying himself out of her grasp. "I promise I'll let Dabi know you were thinking of him though. He can be really cold, but I know you're his favorite here too." Magna laughs, bringing her hands up to encompass a brightening red face. Magna had been one of the first mercenaries Dabi introduced him to, and Izuku was incredibly grateful that she had been a welcoming and warm impression. She had been the only one who made him feel better about the quirk he had. The commission would sooner let everyone in this underground hole burn than blemish their reputation. She had said, patting Izuku on the head. "Don't let them or anyone tell you your quirk's something to hide. You gotta grab the world by its neck and tell them, this is the way I am, and it's not going to change, yeah?" He recognized Magna's duality. As kind as she was, she had a massive record of crime. The dolting woman that would slip him hard candies was the same one who he'd seen knock a client out cold onto the concrete when he looked at her funny. She was a bit handsy and blunt, but Izuku was glad to be her friend. The man next to Magna is staring at Izuku, prosthetic eye practically boring a hole into his head. Tendons unnaturally peek out from behind the blond man's burly arms, accompanying an angry clenched jaw that made Izuku feel uneasy. He settles for a small wave and swears the air feels 10 degrees colder when he earns a frown in response. "Oh, don't be rude, Muscular." Izuku squeaks as Magna yells, slapping the man's bare shoulders scoldingly. How familiar was she with him that she could just do that? Seriously? That's Dabi's kid. The least you can do is show some manners, you brute. Muscular glances up and down at Izuku's short form, the boy feeling as though he were being scrutinized under a microscope. Finally, he spits onto the ground, facing his back to Izuku. "Whatever." Izuku stands his ground, suppressing the shiver that ran up his spine. He'd never met Muscular before, but had heard more than plenty about someone with a title like the carnal murderer. He wasn't a resident of Yo, just as elusive as you'd expect a suspect of capital murder to be. Muscular was a man with no moral restraint. Izuku had no obligation to get along with him. Magna rolls her eyes, falling back into her seat. "Ignore him. He's all testy because he hasn't been requested for some gory job lately." Judging by the way Muscular's biceps tense at the comment, Izuku is inclined to believe her. But enough of him. Magna rests her elbows on her lap, leaning her sharp chin into her hands. "What brings you here, Fixer?" Izuku shifts in his seat and clears his throat. He had marched over to Magna with so much resolve, but now he feels almost embarrassed, especially since Muscular wasn't even bothering to pretend that he wasn't eavesdropping. "Here goes nothing. I want you to teach me how to fight." From behind her sunglasses, Izuku can see Magna's eyes perk up in surprise. "I know you've shown me some self-defense, but I mean real fighting. I don't want to be a mercenary or anything," he sputters. "I'm not looking for more money. I mean, more money would be nice to eat, but I don't need that much money." He was getting off topic. Izuku lets out a frustrated sigh. "It's just, something really bad is going to happen in 3 days. A friend of mine might get hurt. Dabi's taught me to evade and think, but he's never taught me how to fight. Physically fight or protect." Izuku green eyes stare into Magna's imploringly, catching the sight of his own reflection in the black lenses of her sunglasses. This isn't a fight I want to run away from. Please, big sis. Because what if Yagi-san can't run away? He can wave around a knife all he wanted, but after seeing the way people like Toga Himiko moved around, Izuku knew he was outmatched. He wasn't just going to rely on underhanded tricks and illegal explosives to get by. He only had 3 days to learn. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. He wasn't too built. Jumping in to help move suspiciously heavy boxes for vendors only got you so far, but he could at least learn to defend himself. To defend a student. Magna whistles, bringing her hands up to squeeze Izuku baby face. He knows it's futile to resist as she pulls the freckled cheeks. Look at you, making your own decisions. It's like watching a baby learn to walk. She looked like she was about to jump out of her stool in excitement, fidgeting back and forth. Oh wait, I've got the perfect gift to celebrate the occasion. Magna hops off her seat, turning on her heel and shifting through her bag. You got some sort of power quirk, kid? Muscular has all but turned around now, narrowing a mean side eye at Izuku. Izuku stares blankly back. The blonde was terrifying, but there's no way Izuku would just tell him his quirk, especially since Muscular didn't like him. And maybe it was a bit childish, but just because they were both under the law it didn't mean he had to be buddy-buddy with him. He holds his stony silence. Muscular's lip curls to a snarl, his nails digging into his palm. It looked like it was taking him every ounce of his self-control to not strangle the life out of Izuku. Oi, keep up that attitude and I'll give you a first-hand lesson on what a real punch feels like, you demon brat. Happy thoughts, Mr. Carnal Murder Man. Keep the peace, Magna sing-songs, strolling back over to Izuku. She's concealing an item in her hands, wrapped in a small white handkerchief peeking out from her palms. I used these back before Yor was nice enough to put together my big OL magnet. They were a little small on me, which means that they should be just a teeny bit loose for you. She winks, lips pursing together in a giggle. Now, open your hands. Izuku does as he's told, holding out his scarred fingers in earnest. Magna gently hands him the weapon, which is much heavier than he expected. He staggers from the sudden weight, earning a snort from the larger woman, and runs his thumb along the cloth. He can feel the edge of a blade inside. Magna stands back up to full height, and even with Izuku sitting she towers over him. She was intimating, powerful, and experienced, just about everything Izuku wasn't. I'm not like Dabi, I know better than to stop a kid from knocking heads when he needs to. Magna says. But promise me you won't cause too much trouble, okay? Don't be like your big sis, your heart's too big to burden the work we do here. The image of the dark figure on the screen disappears in a flash. Tsukachi is left staring at his own reflection on the glassy surface, remote pointed to the television in a tight grip. It's been nearly a full year for him. 1 year of radio static silence on the pro-hero serial murders. He's been pushed and pulled at every front for answers, trapped in a limbo of incidents and damage control. Of police cars showing up to the crime scene just a moment too late and delivering apologies to newly widowed spouses. Tsukachi was a man who took pride in his profession as a detective, but even this fruitless search in the dark has threatened to break him. It wore him down and jaded him. So the call was a sudden detour in this vicious cycle he's grown accustomed to. An urgent phone call had interrupted his breakfast, nauseatingly turning his morning over on its head. It had only taken the words, threat, and for him to abandon the incident reports he had been looking over and the third cup of coffee he had been drinking. Tsukachi reclines back in his computer chair, exhaling heavily. That video, he had watched it over and over again, practically worn out the rewind button on his godforsaken remote. An unknown figure had managed to evade every one of the cameras outside of the local precinct, as if it were child's play, and dropped the video in Tsukachi's lap on a silver platter. The language that the elusive man used was charged and accusatory, feeling as though the man had grabbed Tsukachi by the collar and spat the words in his face. Your personal biases and blind trust in every hero stops you from seeing them as people who are equally capable of corruption. It was a thinly veiled threat. And this was different. This was the language of a man who wanted to make some sort of radical statement. Maybe one who'd go so far as to commit murder to put heroes in a bad light. Tsukachi reaches over to hold the aged camcorder in his hand. He's inspected it over and over again since he had sat down, trained-eye taking note of every detail on the device. A threat on UA with any substance was unheard of in his line of work. He would thoroughly investigate this, sure, but it gave him no justification to induce a massive panic on the school. He reads the freshly scribbled name along the camera's side. At the least, if anything were to happen, he knows who would have to answer for it. Aizawa Shoyuda ran a calloused hand over his face, sighing heavily. He holds a black coffee in the other hand, eyes scanning over the sea of classroom chairs and chattery students. The attendance list on his desk is redundant because he's long memorized the names of each of his students, in addition to putting a face to every brightly colored costume in the crowd. Aizawa's come to know ugly loud hues and tacky designs as the trademark of any first year's design. They'll surely grow to refine them later on in their education. Class 1. You'd have to drag it out of him to say aloud, but he was quite fond of his class this year. Hisashi had called him soft after he admitted the fact, practically cackling his ear off in the teacher's lounge during their lunch breaks. Aizawa had given a gruff retort at the time, but present Mike and Midnight had both verbally agreed. Class 1A this year had their own special magnetism, optimistic as many fresh out of middle schoolers would be, but with a class dynamic that was lively and spurred competition. They were energetic but just needed to be pushed in the right direction. He was intrigued to see what they'd all grow into. And maybe he was a bit biased, but he was very determined to see Shinsu's growth through to the end. It would be his first time personally training a student, after all. His phone suddenly vibrates in his back pocket. Hello. Aizawa answers, exasperated. There's only 2 people on his contacts that would call, knowing that he's at work. Aizawa. The voice on the other end greets warmly. All might. Aizawa's eyes flicker to the time on his wrist. He narrows his eyes, turning away from his very rowdy and nosy class. If you're calling about your impromptu absence, 13 already filled me in about your predicament. About that, Toshinori says, I will be present for today's training session. It wouldn't be the first time All Might had met the students in his depleted form, but there was no use in that. Aizawa's patience is already wearing thin. I will actually be arriving with company. Company? Like an official? He wouldn't be surprised. It seemed as though the commission had been constantly on his but lately, asking about this year's new students. It made sense that they were more on edge, with UA being smack in the middle of a hotspot for civilian disappearances. What a time his students were growing up in. No bureaucrats. It's Hisashi. See, I've already verified it with Nizu, and... Toshinori begins his winded explanation, but Aizawa cuts him off. Wait, the kid from the bento store? He pinches the bridge of his nose, leaning against the desk. Aizawa knew Toshinori was soft, had known since he'd seen the man sulk at the premise that one of his students might not like him, but seriously? Why am I just hearing this from you now? He demands. Toshinori chuckles. I wasn't certain if he'd even want to visit at first, but he seemed very happy to take up my offer. I believe I've mentioned before that he has quite a detailed eye for hero work. Yes. You have many times? Aizawa says. Toshinori's life outside of hero work was an aspect Aizawa was very indifferent to hear about, but the sudden presence of Hisashi in Toshinori's vocabulary was something that did not go unnoticed. Especially since it seemed like Hisashi had been indirectly helping Toshinori with his teaching issue. It made sense that All Might wasn't the best teacher. Not only did he lack the proper experience, but Aizawa was certain that the man had used more brute force than self-reflection to climb to the #1 spot. That wasn't going to translate well with instruction. This was the same guy who had nearly let Bakugo Katsuki blow up an entire building during his battle trial lesson. It had been a flawless victory, but would it kill All Might to try and preach the importance of self-restraint? And it seemed that the kid, because Hisashi had to be a kid, Aizawa had graded enough papers in his career to recognize awful teenager handwriting, was an endless stream of new lesson ideas and teaching outlines. Toshinori's teaching agenda was practically stuffed with green post-it notes, scribbles of advice and brainstorming for team combo. Moose. Aizawa had seen the array of ideas in passing, and although some ideas were amateurish and betrayed Hisashi's age, other ideas were actually very thoughtful and introspective. He was almost impressed. I called 13 to let her know before. It'll just be to spectate, Aizawa. And then I could introduce him to the class. God, Aizawa can see it now, the massive smile Toshinori surely has on his face. That sounds like it could be a distraction. Introduce him after the lesson, and just for a small amount of time. It won't be a hindrance. Aizawa closes his eyes and sighs. That you're really looking out for this kid, huh? Toshinori chuckles, voice statusy through Aizawa's cell. I suppose I am. He has the potential to be great. I just want to give him the opportunity and push him in the right path. I believe I've heard you say the same about a certain young Shinso. Aizawa doesn't bother responding, which only makes Toshinori laugh harder. Although, it can be said for all of our students, I suppose. They're a good group of kids, aren't they? Every single one of them. They are. That's so he'll just be watching then? Hisashi is polite. Toshinori says. He wouldn't interrupt 13th's instruction. That's all Aizawa needs to hear. As long as you keep him in line. Just make sure you call me before heading over. He says, having long taken the phone off his ear. He hangs up. Just here. He's really here. Izuku presses his hands on Toshinori's office window, green eyes greedily taking in the sight that is UA High's campus. It's massive, as amazing as he imagined it to be, with different structures littered across the stretch of land. Toshinori's office was on one of the higher floors of UA's main building, high enough that he could even pinpoint the dome of USJ in the distance. The glass building he stood in reached upwards, as if to uphold the brilliant azure sky of the perfect day. Living in the underground tunnels of Yoru desensitized him. Fixer, flourished in the hideaway of shadows and artificial light, learned to survive in an epicenter of criminal activity. In the underbelly of the city, Izuku was unconditionally accepted and he gladly welcomed that quiet warmth of safety. He had taken the daytime for granted, always moving forward with his head down and his line of sight to his red shoes. So to Yoru's small blue flame UA High was the burning sun, dazzling and far too bright to look at directly. From the polished brick entryway to the pristine glass building showcasing the distant trees, Izuku was constantly reminded of UA's place as the best hero school in the country. Atop the forest overlooking Mizudafu, UA seemed like the pinnacle of the world. Once the pinnacle of his world, when Izuku had once imagined himself in this very exact spot as a hero student. The dark bags under his eyes were the only indicator of his bubbling stress as Izuku turned to face Toshinori, disturbing the transparent lanyard around his neck that was simply labeled Hisashi. He wasn't dumb. He knew that Toshinori, with the bleeding heart the older man seemed to carry, pitied him. He had once taken advantage of that even, drawn to him like a stray dog would to the hand that feeds it. Toshinori seemed to have no shortage of money to buy Izuku lunch, and in return Izuku kept coming back, convinced that the teacher enjoyed the company. In time, Izuku had even begun to open up about his own life to Toshinori, although he omitted anything incriminating. Izuku best processed his thoughts aloud, to the absolute disdain of anyone around him. In a way, Toshinori helped him organize his musings, Izuku's chatter about current events easily mistaken for a fanboy fixation. By the rate of Toshinori's blood-coughing episodes, Izuku saw no harm in checking on the man's deteriorating health. Toshinori had offhandedly mentioned that he'd forget to eat due to his condition, and ever since Izuku made it his mission to never stop bothering him to eat. At that point he didn't know who was helping who. Izuku had walked alongside Toshinori in the hallways of UA with the name tag carrying his biological father's namesake and wondered what Toshinori exactly was to him. A good man? A person who could be in danger? It didn't really matter if he couldn't put a name to it. Izuku moves away from the window, face creasing in worry as he watches Toshinori place his cell phone on his desk for a second time. The League's messenger had said they were attacking a training facility, not the school. They were surely safe here, but even so. Is Eraserhead still not picking up his phone? Izuku asks. Toshinori shakes his head. Izuku's gaze hardens, but he forces himself calm, mutely sitting on the chair across from Toshinori. He places his overstuffed satchel on his lap, straightening himself in his seat. The unknown contents inside. It was the best he could scramble together in a few days. He may be busy, Toshinori says. Although it's unlike him to not respond, especially since 13 should be mainly leading the exercise. The older man deflates a bit, which immediately fills Izuku with a pang of guilt. I apologize, young man. We may need to wait. Ah, there's no need for apologies, Yagi-san. Izuku sputters as he raises his hands, white bandages tightly wound at his forearms. The self-inflicted scars that chased up his arms were now numerous enough to raise eyebrows. Although no one could possibly know why there were so many, Izuku would rather have no one see them. If anything, this was really more than I could ask for. He adds sheepishly. It's easy to fall into a more carefree persona when he's spending time with Toshinori. Izuku beams his most reassuring smile. I'm really grateful that you even thought to bring me here in the first place. Like, I'd never seen a library as big as UA's before. The green-haired boy gestures widely. If we just stayed here instead of going to USJ, I'd still consider today a great day. Izuku holds his toothy grin, not daring to falter. By the lie, Yagi-san. Toshinori returns his stare, and Izuku swears that Toshinori can see right through him. Like he was going to shoot up from behind his desk and call Izuku out on his lie. Tell him that he had known there was something off with Izuku all along. That Izuku was an awful person with an ugly quirk and that it was a mistake giving a raggedy, homeless kid like him the time of day. That he should be locked up. Or maybe he's overthinking. He thinks he might start hyperventilating if the silence dragged on any longer. Toshinori doesn't say any of those things. I'm sure Eraserhead will call back soon, so hopefully it won't come to that, he says. I know meeting new people might be a bit hard, but I insist everyone at USJ is a great person. So Toshinori thought he was being avoidant because Izuku was shy. Damn it. 13 is a great instructor. I couldn't think of a better teacher to guide through a rescue lesson. Her quirk is quite something to behold in person too. Izuku had read up on 13 inside and out. A pristine record with a limited villain contact, seeing as she specialized in rescue. A quirk perfect for atomically dissolving the falling debris of a building in an instant or shutting down nearly any natural disaster. Somewhere in a notebook deep underground, the name 13 in bold is crossed off on a list of suspects. The chance of her being the traitor, unlikely. The information comes to Izuku easily. Black hole, right? To be able to use such a volatile quirk for support, it shows how masterful she is over it to maneuver it for rescue. He says and truly means it. Of course you'd say that, fanboy that you are. Toshinori laughs. Try not to barrage 13 for her autograph the moment we get there. Or burst into tears. In my defense, I'm sure there are many die-hard fans who'd bawl their eyes out if they got a great rescue hero's autograph too. Izuku says, no bite behind his words. Exactly. That's just your kind of crowd. I can handle it just fine, but I'm not sure how 13 would handle your crybaby antics. 13 deserves all the praise she can get. Izuku huffs. If the way I show praise is by tearing up a bit, then so be it. I think rescue is just about the most heroic thing you can do. Rescue was what had captivated him. Izuku still remembers the old videos of All Might he used to watch as a child, grinning ear to ear. He was sure he had driven his poor mother insane then, small and insistent on watching the same videos over and over again. Izuku had been absolutely enthralled. He had watched All Might save the injured from the ruin like some sort of otherworldly Olympian hero forged from rubble and destruction. A pillar of hope rising from adversity with his head held high and a smile on his face. That's what had captivated him about heroes. I'd have to disagree, Toshinori says, to Izuku's surprise. Don't get me wrong, 13 is a wonderful rescue hero. But the obstacles she had to overcome to master her quirk, that expertise wasn't cultivated on its own. Toshinori continues at Izuku's blank expression. Hisashi, do you know why I brought you here today? To watch Class 1A at USJ? Because I'm a stellar conversationalist over Katsudon? Izuku jokes, not quite understanding what Toshinori is getting at. What could he possibly see in Izuku that would make him worthy enough to drag out here? As good as that answer is, not just that. Toshinori snorts. He brings up a bony finger to tap at the side of his forehead. It's because of your brain. You're crafty and have a keen eye for details that easily go missed. He leans forward, eyes agleam with a feeling Izuku couldn't quite recognize. You have a great grasp of understanding quirks, and push those limits by thinking of ways they can be utilized in unpredictable environments. I've never seen someone who's so young and knowledgeable about hero news. Behind the growth of every great pro hero is a masterful instructor and organizer. Toshinori says, I see real potential in you, young man. I think what you are missing is opportunity. An opportunity to cultivate that talent into a way to help aspiring heroes. Izuku blinks up at Toshinori, completely dumbfounded. Toshinori didn't pity him. Maybe he did before, but this wasn't some ploy to parade a homeless child around UA like some sort of charity case. Toshinori respected Izuku, saw him worthy enough to keep around, to bring him to arguably the most expensive place he'd ever stepped foot on, and introduce him to his class. You think too highly of me, Yagi-san. Izuku chooses to say. You don't know anything about what I've done. His bandaged hands hold tightly at the strap of his shtahel, the hidden contents of the bag suddenly weighing heavy on his shoulders. Toshinori had opened his arms to Izuku without even knowing who he was. And God, Toshinori couldn't be any more wrong about him. He wasn't worth the kind-hearted man's acknowledgement. Not at all, says Toshinori. You, walking beside me now, has shown me that you're a good person with a big heart. Your place may not be at UA, but you possess qualities that would make you a great fit for a job in administrative work, done behind the scenes. Have you ever heard of the Hero Public Safety Commission? Yes. He spent the past year scrutinizing, absolutely loathing the Hero Commission for the dirt he had managed to scour. Reckless destruction of neighborhoods amidst squabbles. A council with the power to sweep the crimes of corrupt heroes under the rug, who have allowed the UA traitor to even exist. They'd never entertain the thought of a traitor within the hero ranks. I think I've heard of them. He mumbles out. A job where he'd have to passively sit on the sidelines, put on a BLNDFLD, and pretend that something wasn't wrong. It was an insult to tell him he belonged there. Izuku lets out a forlorn laugh. I don't think that's an option for me, even if I wanted to. His voice small. Toshinori shakes his head, and Izuku can't fault him. Yagi-san doesn't know. He doesn't know. Hisashi. Izuku shifts in his seat uncomfortably. That's not even his real name. You underestimate yourself, you're a very bright kid. You're perceptive and kind, but always walk around like you're carrying some sort of invisible weight on your shoulders. The words are genuine and firm in their resolve. What gave him away? Izuku's jaw tenses. I don't know what burden you're bearing, whether it's internalized or particular to your home situation. Toshinori rests his elbows on the desk, leaning forward. He's completely serious. Izuku suddenly understands what UA saw in Toshinori as a teacher, so reassuring and firm in his words all at once. You don't even feel safe enough in trusting me with your full name. Izuku clamps his mouth shut. Lie after lie piling onto each other. He feels like he's being cornered. His hand finds its way into his unruly curls, not quite able to look Toshinori in the eye. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, Yagi-san. He couldn't do anything but apologize. He had trusted Toshinori, but how could he expect Toshinori to trust him when he didn't even know his name? Shame burned bright in his stomach. He always knew that there was a risk, always knew that there'd be a point where Toshinori would get impatient and start asking the hard questions. Because what else could he really say? Izuku had acted on impulse, said yes to Toshinori's invite only because he didn't trust anyone but himself to protect him. And wasn't that a stupid sentiment in itself? Izuku's jaw clenches and he stares at the ground. At the tiled floor of a school he didn't belong in. Anywhere but towards the man trying to stifle a cough across from him. He just wanted to hold on to this shred of normalcy just a bit longer. I never wanted to prod you or pressure you into telling me if there's anything wrong. Toshinori pulls back, and the walls of the office suffocating Izuku barely relent. Izuku knows he's trying to conceal it, but he doesn't miss the specks of blood that cling to Tashinori's mouth, or the smell of iron permeating the air to add to his nausea. If you don't want to talk, I understand. But if your situation is truly compromising, know that I am here as a person you can confide in and trust. Izuku stands up abruptly, his chair squeaking as it's forcibly dragged against the floor. A small part of him, self-loathing and disappointed, laughs at himself from running away yet again. He just wanted to be anywhere from here. You're bleeding again. I'll go get you some water. Tashinori sighs, chair creaking as he leans back into the plush leather. Maybe he's disappointed in Izuku too. Of course. I'll be here. The green-haired boy doesn't waste time shuffling out of the room, closing the door behind him with a resounding slam. He leans his back against it, scalp digging into the grooves of the wood and groans. The hallway is empty. It seemed like this floor held only empty conference rooms and teachers' offices. From the staircase in the distance, he can hear the quiet chatter of students. He was completely alone. But he'll sulk here all by himself, DMN it. He'll just have to get through the day. But get through today, make sure Tashinori's safe, and then just disappear from his life completely. Simple. Like he had done with everyone else. It would be easy, so easy to be untraceable once more, but why did he feel so bad about it? It was selfish. Izuku closes his eyes, tries to take back control of his shuddering heart and burning lungs, and takes a deep breath. He immediately jigs at the stench of blood that reaches the roof of his mouth, potent and fresh and utterly overwhelming. Izuku's eyes fly open in a frantic haste. They were inside UA. They were supposed to be safe. Izuku is suddenly yanked off the door, yelping as a hand digs itself into the back of his head and forcibly presses him against the wall. His head makes a resounding bang against the hard surface, briefly dazing him. Had someone seriously been waiting outside? Why didn't he sense anyone? The attacker makes a grab for Izuku's hands, as though to incapacitate him and pin them against his back, but Izuku throws him off, digging his elbow into the man's side. He pivots in a daze of confusion and fear and anger, punching his attacker square in the chin. Magna would be proud. The villain's hand catches nothing but the bandages of Izuku's right arm, cloth unraveling from the scars littering his forearm. Clad in a black and gray jumpsuit, the man stumbles back, raising a gloved hand to hold his jaw. Bottles line his belt, glass stained red as the man pulls himself together. Ouch, that hurt. What a weak love tap. The villain sneers. Izuku ignores him, raising his arms up defensively. He stands beside Tashinori's office. There was no way this villain was getting past this door. Who are you? He demands. Who am I? I'm me, always have been and always will be. No, I'm not. The man raises both hands to his face, curling his fingers over his eyes as though he were trying to mimic wearing glasses. My only question is, do I know you? I feel like I have a picture of you in my head. Izuku swears he can hear shuffling from inside Tashinori's office, a bead of sweat trickling down to his eyebrow. Oh, I know. Not ringing any bells. The villain snaps his fingers, pointing at Izuku. You're the guy Toga-chan was talking about. The one with the wild green hair, scars, freckles, and alleged manic bloodlust. Still on the fence about that last one. Is that why you noticed me earlier than I thought you would? Did you whiff me out like some kind of dog? The door beside him creaks open, and Izuku twists his eyes closed, voice pitching to a yell. Stay behind me, Yagi-san. The villain puffs out his chest, the gray T on his chest ever more prominent. He gives a mock salute. Sorry, I'm gonna have to take some blood samples from you and your old friend in there, duty calls? Like hell he was. Izuku curls his hands into fists, positioning himself closer to the office. No more with the secrets. He raises his hand to his mouth, ready to draw blood by biting if he had to, before his breath is abruptly snatched away. It's like a tornado suddenly rips through the hallway, billowing and tossing Izuku aside like a rag doll. His eye can barely catch the movement of an all-too-familiar yellow suit, far more muscled and intimidating than he remembered. Tashinori's fist collides with the villain's face and sends him flying, skidding down the hallway like some sort of gruesome skipping stone in a pond. The only reason why Izuku doesn't fly away is because the man's holding tight onto his bare arm as he's thrown a cast. The fight's over before it's even begun, but Izuku is winded, absolutely lost as he manages to find his own 2 feet once again in Toshinori's shadow. He can't seem to remember how to breathe, because standing before him, shining and gallant, still smelling of iron, is the man he had eaten lunch with for the past few months. The man who had made Izuku laugh over cheap katsudon and was the best listener he had ever known. All Might.